Hey guys! Tonight we plunge into the grimy underbelly of the Middle Ages, where the streets are a soup of mud and worse, and the air's so thick with stink you can taste it. You're standing in a bustling medieval town, its crooked timber houses, leaning over a lane that's more sewer than road. The squelch of your boots drowned out by hawkers and squealing pigs. This isn't the nightly romance of tapestries, it's a world where filth is a way of life, and customs we'd gag at were as normal as breathing. Picture yourself dodging a splash from an upstairs window, the kind of surprise that makes you rethink your day. Honestly, with no soap and a river that's basically a latrine, you probably won't survive this unscathed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the local time. I'm curious where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a 14th century English town, where the streets are a churning mess of human waste, animal dung, and whatever the butcher didn't sell. Mainstream history tells us that medieval urban sanitation was non-existent. Open sewers ran through towns, and waste was dumped wherever gravity took it, turning every step into a gamble. You're weaving past a cart of rotting vegetables, the driver cursing as his wheel sticks in the muck, and you're holding your cloak to your nose. But it's no use, the stench is everywhere. A mix of sour milk and something you don't want to name. You're trying to reach the market, but the path's a slimy gauntlet, and you're not sure what's worse, the smell or the squish underfoot. Here's a quirky tidbit. Townsfolk sometimes tossed their garbage into midden heaps right outside their doors, believing the peel's stench warded off evil spirits. You're passing one now, a festering hill of fish bones and broken pots, and you're wondering if the spirits are laughing or gagging. Historians still argue whether these heaps were lazy habit or desperate superstition, but you're betting it's both, especially when a rat the size of a cat darts across your path. You're clutching a sprig of lavender, a merchant's overpriced freshener, but it's like fighting a dragon with a toothpick. You're praying for a breeze, but the air's as still as the muck. The street's chaos is a daily ritual. You're dodging a woman dumping a bucket from her window, no warning, just a splash that misses you by inches. You're shouting up at her, but she's already gone, and you're left wiping your boots on a patch of grass that's more brown than green. The church, always looming like those medieval sermons we've heard, preaches cleanliness of soul, not body, so no one bats an eye at the filth. You're thinking of those noble bed chambers, where lords had servants to handle the mess. Here, you're ankle deep in it, and there's no escape. You're passing a pig rooting in the sludge, and you're half jealous it seems right at home. The people don't seem to mind. You're watching a baker hawk loaves by the street's edge, his hands dusted with flour but his apron suspiciously stained. He's shouting over the din of a tanner dumping wastewater, and you're wondering how anyone eats here without a cast iron stomach. The crowd's a mix: merchants, peasants, kids chasing a stray dog, and they're all wading through the same muck, their clothes patched and their faces smudged. You're catching a whiff of someone's unwashed tunic, and it's a reminder. Baths are for the rich, and you're not one of them. You're thinking of that Black Death village, where filth fueled disease. Here, it's just life, and you're trying not to slip. The street shapes everything. You're noticing how folks cluster near the cleaner corners, where a rare stream might wash the worst away. But even that's fouled by the tanner's runoff. You're hearing a neighbor grumble about the king's tax for a promised sewer, but the coins vanish, and the muck stays. You're dodging a cartwheel spray, And you're laughing despite yourself. Surviving this street feels like a badge of honor. You're finally reaching the market. The stall's a colorful blur, but the ground's no better. And you're bracing for what's next in this world of glorious grime as you step into the square. The street's stench clings to you, a reminder of a world where filth isn't a flaw, it's the foundation. You're carrying a mix of disgust and awe, ready to dive deeper into customs that make this muck look tame. The Middle Ages are a messy masterpiece, and you're just getting started. One slimy step at a time. In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun. You're weaving through the narrow lanes of this medieval town, the dawn light barely cutting through the fog as the stench of last night's street muckfish bones, dung, and worse clings to your cloak like a bad memory. The markets, waking up, its stalls creaking under sparse wares, but you're on edge, eyes darting to the windows above. In the Middle Ages, chamber pots were the grim answer to nature's call, and their contents were tossed out with a shout if you're lucky, turning every morning into a dodge or soap gauntlet. You're clutching your lavender sprig, still useless against the town's reek. As you navigate this nasty ritual, where a splash from above is just another day in a world that bathes in filth. Mainstream history tells us that medieval towns lacked plumbing, so chamber pots, ceramic, or wooden bowls kept under beds or in corners were universal. Their contents dumped into streets or cesspits, often without regard for passersby. You're sidestepping a puddle that's suspiciously yellow, your boots already caked from yesterday's slimy streets. Historical records describe town ordinances fining reckless dumpers, but enforcement was spotty, and you're learning fast that a cry of Gardilou, from the French gardes low, is your only warning. You're scanning the windows, heart skipping when a shutter creaks, and you're wondering how anyone survives this without a permanent grimace. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some townsfolk believed tossing pot contents at dawn cleansed the house of bad spirits, a superstition that made the streets a morning minefield. You're dodging a fresh splash, the woman above muttering about warding off demons as she empties her pot. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or an excuse for lazy hygiene, but you're betting it's a bit of both, especially when the liquid nearly clips your shoulder. You're cursing under your breath, the lavender sprig now a sad joke, and you're praying for a hat or a miracle to shield you from the next toss. The ritual's chaos is relentless. You're passing a row of houses, their upper stories jutting over the lane, perfect for raining misery on your head. A man leans out, shouting Gardilou. A second too late, and you're leaping aside as a foul stream hits the cobblestones, scattering a stray cat. You're yelling up at him, but he's already gone, leaving you to navigate the fresh hazard. The church, always preaching like those medieval sermons, calls for purity of soul, not streets. So this daily deluge is just life, not sin. You're thinking of those black death graves, where filth bred disease. Here, it's breeding resentment, and you're one splash away from losing it. The street's a shared misery. You're spotting a baker, his apron grubby from yesterday's market, sidestepping the same puddles, his scowl matching yours as he dodges a pot's contents. A group of kids, unbothered, splash through the muck, their laughter grating as you pick your way around a particularly rank patch. You're noticing wealthier folk merchants with thicker cloaks hire boys to carry their pots to cesspits, a luxury you can't afford. You're recalling those noble bedchambers, where servants whisked away the mess. Here, you're the target, and there's no escape. You're muttering about fairness, but the next shout sends you scurrying, cloak flapping like a flag of surrender. The custom shapes the town's rhythm. You're learning to walk faster at dawn, when pots are emptied, and to hug the walls, though that risks brushing against the midden heaps we gagged at. You're hearing a neighbor brag about her fine pot, glazed to hide the smell, but it's still ending up in the street, and you're rolling your eyes fancy or not. It's all the same down here. The town's laws, like those fining dumpers, are a joke. You're dodging another splash, and you're betting the bailiffs too busy to care. You're thinking of that plague village, where waste fueled sickness. Here, it's fueling a grim kind of camaraderie. As you swap glares with a fellow dodger, there's a flicker of humanity, though. You're catching a woman's apologetic wave after a near miss, her shrug saying she's just doing what everyone does. You're nodding back, a shared understanding, like the market's bartered bread, that you're all stuck in this filthy dance. You're finally reaching a clearer lane. The markets hum ahead, but the street's wet sheen reminds you, no one's clean here. Not really. You're shaking off your boots, the lavender sprig drooping, and you're bracing for the next custom in this world where disgust is just another day. As you step into the square, the morning's splashes linger, a testament to a town that thrives. In its own mess, you're carrying a mix of revulsion and resilience, ready to face more of the Middle Ages' revolting quirks, one dodged pot at a time. The market's calling, but you're keeping one eye on the windows, knowing this filthy ritual is far from the worst you'll see. You're pushing through the crowded market square, the spring air buzzing with the shouts of vendors and the clink of coins. But the stench of yesterday's chamber pot splashes, and street muck clings to you like a second skin. The stalls are piled with bread and wilted greens, yet there's a whiff of something foul or unwashed bodies. A medieval norm where bathing's a rare treat, not a daily habit. You're weaving past a baker, his sweat-soaked tunic reeking as he hawks loaves, and you're holding your lavender sprig, now a wilted joke, as you dive into the smelly reality of a world where soap's a luxury and everyone's a walking odor cloud. You're about to navigate the great unwashed, where the Middle Ages hygiene habits make the street's filth seem almost quaint. Mainstream history tells us that medieval Europe viewed bathing with suspicion. Frequent washing was seen as vain or even unhealthy, disrupting the body's humors, and most folks bathed once a month. If that, you're squeezing between a merchant and a peasant woman, their combined aroma of sweat, smoke, and sour milk making your eyes water. Historical records note that public bathhouses existed but were pricey and often doubled as social hubs, leaving the poor, like you, to make do with a quick splash from a filthy river. You're clutching your cloak, trying to breathe through your mouth, and you're wondering how anyone flirts in this funk, let alone lives. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a layer of dirt protected the skin from evil airs, so skipping baths was a health choice, not just laziness. You're eyeing a blacksmith, his face smudged with soot and pride, as if his grime's a shield against demons or disease. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a misread of ancient medical texts, but you're betting it's an excuse for a town too busy surviving to scrub. You're sniffing your own tunic, faintly rank after days in these streets, and you're half tempted to join the dirty as healthy club, if only to fit in. The market's a symphony of stinks. You're passing a fishmonger, her hands slick with brine, her apron a bouquet of week-old cod, and you're gagging, the lavender sprig useless against her aura. A gaggle of kids dart by, their hair matted and their giggles unbothered, as if the town's collective reek is just home. You're noticing wealthier folk merchants with dyed cloaks douse themselves in rose water, a pricey mask for their own funk, but it's like spraying perfume on a pig. You're thinking of those Black Death huts, where filth bred fleas. Here, it's breeding a smell that could knock out a horse. You're dodging a man's armpit as he haggles, and you're praying for a breeze that never comes. The church doesn't help. You're recalling those medieval sermons, preaching soul cleansing over body washing, as if stinks of virtue if your heart's pure. Bathings for nobles, who soak in private tubs, like those gilded bed chambers we envied, while you're stuck with a bucket of cold water. If you're lucky, you're passing a monk, his robe stiff with grime, muttering about vanity, and you're rolling your eyes as piety smells worse than the fishmonger's stall. The town's river, where some dunk their feet, is a stew of waste from those chamber pot tosses we dodged, so you're steering clear, even if your skin's begging for a rinse. You're thinking of that plague village, where hygiene was a death sentence. Here, it's just a choice no one makes. Social life thrives in the funk. You're watching a couple flirt by a bread stall, their smiles bright despite the haze of body odor, and you're marveling at their noses' resilience. You're catching a whiff of a woman's hair, braided with grease and market dust, and you're wondering how love blooms when everyone smells like a week-old stew. The crowds, a mosaic tanners, weavers, beggars all united by their ripe aroma, and you're starting to see it as a badge of survival, like dodging pot splashes. You're bartering for a loaf, the baker's sweat dripping to close, and you're holding your breath, wishing for a bathhouse you can't afford. There's a grim camaraderie, though. You're sharing a nod with a peasant. His tunic is rank as yours, and it's a silent pact you're all in this stinky mess together. Like the market's shared bread before the plague. You're laughing despite yourself when a kid flicks mud at you, his grin saying the filth's just life. You're finally grabbing your loaf, the market's chaos fading, but the town's smell sticks to you, a reminder of a world where cleanliness is a dream for the rich. You're tucking the lavender away, accepting the reek, and you're bracing for the next disgusting custom in this gloriously gross age. As you leave the square, the crowd's odor lingers, a testament to a town that wears its filth like armor. You're carrying a mix of disgust and respect, ready to face more medieval quirks. One whiff at a time, the street's muck awaits, but you're tougher now, even if your nose isn't. You're trudging back to your cramped hovel from the reeking market, the loaf in your basket a small victory against the town's stench of unwashed bodies, and chamber pot splashes that still lingers in your nose. The air in your one-room home isn't much better, a mix of smoke and musty straw, and as you settle on a wobbly stool, you feel a familiar itch crawling across your scalp lice. The Middle Ages' uninvited guests, as common as the muck in the streets. You're scratching furiously, the lavender sprig from that filthy square now tucked away, as you dive into the itchy reality of living with these tiny pests. A disgusting custom where scratching is a way of life and cleanliness is a fairy tale, mainstream. History tells us that lice were a universal plague in medieval Europe, thriving in unwashed hair, clothes, and bedding due to rare bathing and packed living conditions, like those we saw in the plague village's crowded huts. You're raking your nails across your scalp, feeling the tiny crawlers scuttle, and you're wincing as you pluck one, its gray body squirming between your fingers. Historical records note that everyone, peasants, nobles, even priests, battled lice, with no effective remedies beyond combing or brute force. And they spread diseases like typhus, though you don't know that yet. You're cursing the itch, wishing for a bath you can't afford, and you're wondering how anyone sleeps with these critters as bedmates. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval folk believed lice were born from sweat and dirt, a sign of a healthy body, so they let them thrive rather than fight them. You're staring at your neighbor, old Meg, who's scratching her matted hair with a proud grin, as if her lice are proof she's tough enough to live. Historians still argue whether this was misguided science or just resignation to a lousy life. But you're betting it's an excuse to avoid the river's filthy dunk we dodged. You're crushing another louse. It's pop grimly satisfying. And you're praying Meg's wrong about their virtues. The hovel's a lice haven. You're glancing at your straw mattress, shared with your family like that Black Death hovel. And you're spotting the telltale specks lice eggs, clinging to the fibers like tiny curses. You're trying to comb them out with a bone comb. Its teeth chipped from overuse, but it's like bailing a sinking boat with a spoon. The kids, sprawled nearby, are scratching too, their giggles masking the misery. And you're scolding them to sit still, though you're losing the battle yourself. You're thinking of the market's sweaty crowd, where lice hopped from tunic to tunic. And you're realizing there's no escape, not in this town, not in this life. The church doesn't care. You're recalling those sermons, preaching soul purity, over body cleaning, as if lice are God's little reminders to stay humble. You're muttering about monks, whose grimy robes we sniffed, probably crawling with more bugs than your mattress. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might have servants to pick their lice, but you're stuck with your nails and a growing pile of squashed pests. You're hearing Meg boast about lice-picking parties, where neighbors groom each other like apes, and you're torn join the communal scratch, or keep your dignity, such as it is. You're thinking of that plague village, where fleas carried death. Here, lice just carry shame, and you're itching for a way out. The customs woven into daily life. You're noticing everyone scratches bakers, tanners, even the priest, when he thinks no one's looking, and it's a grim equalizer, like the chamber pot, dodging we survived. You're trying a trick Meg swears by, rubbing vinegar in your hair. It stings sharp, but the lice unbothered, and you're cursing her wisdom as your scalp burns. You're hearing tales of lice charms, herbs tied in sacks to repel them, but they cost more than your loaf, and you're skeptical, recalling the market's rosewater scams. You're combing again, the kids whining, and you're wondering how love or work happens when you're all crawling with vermin. There's a strange bond, though. You're sitting with your spouse, taking turns picking lice from each other's hair by the fire's dim glow, and it's oddly tender, like the market's shared nods amid the stink. You're laughing when Jack, the youngest, flicks a louse into the flames, his cheer a spark in the hovel's gloom. You're crushing another bug, the itch relentless, and you're accepting it as part of this gritty life. Like the street's muck or the town's reek, you're tucking the kids into the lousy mattress, promising a better comb tomorrow. And you're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where pests are family, too. As you settle by the fire, the itch lingers, a reminder of a town that embraces its filth. You're carrying a mix of disgust and grit, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one scratch at a time. The hovel's quiet, but the lice aren't, and you're tougher for it, even if your scalp begs to differ. You're hunched over in your hovel's dim corner, the fire's faint glow casting shadows on the straw-strewn floor, as the itch of lice from last night's scratching session still prickles your scalp. The air's thick with the smell of smoke, and the lingering funk of unwashed bodies. But now you're facing a new challenge. Your teeth, gritty with last week's porridge, ache with a dull throb. In the Middle Ages, dental care meant chewing on twigs or rubbing ashes, a grim ritual. That's as disgusting as the chamber pot tosses and market stinks you've endured. You're clutching a hazel stick, its end frayed from gnawing. As you dive into the nasty custom of medieval toothbrushing, where plaques the enemy and your only weapon's a splintery branch. Mainstream history tells us that medieval dental hygiene was rudimentary, with most people using sticks, cloths, or their fingers to scrape their teeth, as toothbrushes and paste were centuries away. You're gnawing the hazel twig, its bitter sap stinging your gums, trying to dislodge bits of that market loaf you ate. Historical records show that tooth decay was rampant, worsened by sugary diets among the rich and coarse bread among peasants like you, with no dentists to save you from abscesses or rot. You're wincing as the stick scrapes to hard, your mouth tasting like bark, and you're wondering how anyone smiles in a town where breath could fell an ox. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed chewing parsley or fennel seeds after meals purified the breath, a folk remedy thought to please both God and neighbors. You're eyeing a sprig of parsley old Meg gave you, her lice-ridden wisdom now touting it as a cure for your rank mouth. Historians still argue whether this was practical or just a desperate bid to mask the stench, but you're chewing it, the green tang barely denting the grit on your teeth. You're spitting into the fire, the parsley mixing with the twig sap, and you're betting Meg's more hopeful than helpful. The hovel's no place for a clean mouth. You're glancing at your family, their teeth as yellowed as yours, picking at their own sticks or rubbing their gums with a rag dipped in ale. Another trick Meg swears by, though it just burns. You're trying it, the ale's sour bite micking. You grimace, and you're finding bits of bread stuck in your molars, a reminder of the market's coarse loaves. You're thinking of the crowded market, where every shout carried a whiff of decay, and you're realizing bad breath's as common as lice here, a grim partner to the street's muck we slogged through. You're spitting again, the rag now brown, and you're wishing for something stronger than twigs and optimism. The church, as usual, is no help. You're recalling those sermons, preaching spiritual purity while ignoring the rot in your mouth, as if a clean soul makes up for a festering tooth. You're muttering about monks, whose grimy robes matched their grim grins, and you're betting their breaths no better. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might chew cloves or pay a barber to yank bad teeth, but you're stuck with this stick, its splinters jabbing your gums. You're hearing tales of tooth saints like Saint Apollonia, whose shrine promises relief for a coin, but you're skeptical, recalling the market's rosewater scams and lice charms. You're rubbing ash from the fire, another Meg tip, and you're choking on its grit, wondering if pain's just part of the deal. The custom's a daily grind. You're watching your spouse scrape their teeth with a cloth, their wince mirroring yours, while the kids gnaw twigs like it's a game, their giggles hiding the ache you know they feel. You're noticing everyone in town does it: bakers, tanners, the priest chewing sticks by the well, or spitting ash in the street. A shared misery like dodging pot splashes or picking lice. You're trying a new trick, rubbing salt, stolen from a market stall, but it stings more than it cleans, and you're cursing the lack of anything better. You're thinking of that Black Death village, where filth bred death. Here, it's breeding cavities, and you're praying your teeth hold out. There's a rough bond, though. You're sitting with your family, passing the parsley sprig, and it's a moment of grim laughter, like the lice picking by the fire. You're teasing Jack for spitting ash on his tunic, his pout a spark in the hovel's gloom, and you're feeling a strange pride. You're all fighting the same gritty battle. You're rinsing your mouth with water, the river's taint a faint aftertaste, and you're accepting this as life, like the town's reek or louse-ridden beds. You're tucking the twig away, the ache dulled but not gone, and you're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where even your smile's a fight. As you settle by the fire, your teeth's grit lingers, a reminder of a town that chews through filth and pain. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one splintery bite at a time. The hovel's quiet, but your jaw's not, and you're tougher for it, even if your gums beg to differ. You're sitting at a wobbly table in your hovel, the fire's dim glow barely cutting through the chill as the itch of lice and the grit on your teeth from last night's twig chewing remind you of the Middle Ages' relentless filth. The air's heavy with the scent of smoke and straw. But now a steaming bowl of stew sits before you, its murky surface hiding ingredients that make your stomach churn. In medieval times, food was often a gamble, with stews laced with rancid meat, moldy grain, or worse, a disgusting custom born of scarcity and survival. You're clutching a wooden spoon, the faint whiff of something off hitting your nose, as you dive into the vile reality of sewer soup, where supper's as grim as the street's muck or the market's reek. Mainstream history tells us that medieval diets, especially for peasants, were precarious, with spoiled or substandard ingredients often thrown into stews to stretch meager supplies. As food preservation was rudimentary and harvests unpredictable, you're stirring the stew, spotting a grayish chunk that might be mutton or something less savory floating among wilted greens and barley. Historical records describe peasants eating meat past its prime, grains tainted by fungi, or even scraps scavenged from refuse, all boiled to mask rot. You're swallowing hard, the memory of the chamber pot splashes and unwashed crowds making you question this meal. And you're wondering how hunger trumps disgust in a world this harsh. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cooks believed adding a lucky bone often dug up from a midden heap would bless the stew, warding off sickness despite its dubious origins. You're eyeing a knobby bone bobbing in your bowl, old Meg's voice echoing that it's good for the soul. And you're gagging, recalling her lice-ridden pride. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a grim necessity to use every scrap, but you're betting it's a mix, born of a town where waste, like those street middens, was never truly wasted. You're pushing the bone aside, its grimy sheen a warning, and you're praying the broth's heat killed whatever lurks within. The hovel's a stage for this grim feast. You're watching your family dip their spoons, Jack wrinkling his nose but eating anyway, his hunger louder than his doubts. The stew's taste is off-sour, with a greasy aftertaste. Stand you're chewing slowly, trying not to think about the market's fly-covered meat or the river's taint, where the butcher dumps his scraps. You're thinking of the markets, sweaty bakers and their gritty loaves, and you're realizing food here's a lottery, where every bite risks a bellyache or worse. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth fed fleas. Here, it's feeding you, and you're forcing down another spoonful, hunger winning over fear. The church offers no comfort. You're remembering those sermons, preaching fasting, as piety while ignoring the rot in your bowl, as if a pure soul makes rancid mutton safe. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, dine on fresh venison and spiced wine, their cooks tossing scraps to dogs, not pots. You're stuck with this sewer soup, its ingredients a mystery even old Meg won't name. You're hearing her swear by stew charms, herbs like fennel to hide the stink. But your parsley from the tooth-chewing fiasco is gone, and you're skeptical, recalling the lice vinegar that burned more than it helped. You're stirring again, fishing for something edible, and you're cursing a world where supper's a dare, the customs woven into survival. You're noticing everyone eats this way, peasants at the market, tanners by the river all slurping stews from shared pots, their spoons dipping into the same murky brew. You're thinking of the street's chamber pot chaos, where waste was life, And you're seeing the same grim logic here. Eat what's there, or starve. You're trying a trick. Meg mentioned boiling the stew twice to purify it, but the bone's still there, and the taste hasn't improved. You're sharing the bowl with your spouse, her grimace matching yours. And you're wondering how love survives when dinner smells like a latrine. There's a rough warmth, though. You're passing the spoon to Jack. His cautious sip a small victory, and it's a moment of grit, like the lice picking or tooth scraping bonds. You're laughing when he pulls a face, spitting a gristly bit into the fire. And it's a spark in the hovel's gloom, like dodging a pot splash. You're swallowing another bite, the stew's heat a faint comfort, and you're accepting it as life, like the town's lice or street filth. You're setting the bowl aside, stomach uneasy but full, and you're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where even food's a fight. As the fire dims, the stew's sour aftertaste lingers, a reminder of a town that thrives on what it should discard. You're carrying a mix of disgust and endurance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one grim bite at a time. The hovel's quiet, but your gut's not, and you're tougher for it, even if your appetite begs to differ. You're hunched over in a healer's cramped hut, the air thick with the stench of herbs and something sharper, like rot barely masked by sage, as the flickering rushlight casts shadows on walls stained with who knows what. The sour taste of last night's sewer soup still lingers, joining the itch of lice and the grit of twig-brushed teeth in your catalog of medieval miseries. Now, you're wincing as the healer, a weary woman with stained fingers, probes a festering cut on your arm, muttering about cleansing it with maggots, a disgusting custom that's as grim as the town's shame. Our pot tosses or market reek. You're clutching your frayed cloak, the lavender sprig long gone, as you dive into the stomach-churning world of maggot medicine, where worms are healers and revulsion is the price of survival. Mainstream history tells us that medieval medicine often used maggots to treat infected wounds, as they ate dead flesh, leaving healthy tissue behind. A crude but sometimes effective method in a world without antibiotics. You're staring at the healer's jar, a writhing mass of pale larvae squirming in a bed of muck, and you're gagging as she plucks a few with a twig. Historical records show that battlefield surgeons and village healers alike relied on this trick, especially for gangrene or stubborn sores. Though patients like you endured it with more dread than trust. You're gripping the stool, the cut throbbing, and you're wondering if this is healing or just another medieval nightmare. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers believed maggots carried life spirits that could eat evil humors, making them holy helpers, not just gross worms. You're catching the healer's nod as she sprinkles the larvae on your wound, her eyes gleaming like old Meg's when she praised lice as healthy. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a misread of maggots' real benefits. But you're betting it's a story to make the squirming bearable. You're feeling the first wriggle, a cold tickle that turns your stomach, and you're praying the spirits holy or not know what they're doing. The hut's a grim stage for this cure. You're watching the maggots crawl, their tiny mouths nibbling at the wound's blackened edges, and you're fighting the urge to swipe them off. The sensation like lice on your scalp, but worse. The healer's humming, wrapping a cloth to keep them in place, and you're smelling the rot they're eating, a stench that rivals the street's midden heaps we gagged at. You're thinking of the market's sweaty crowds, where infections spread like gossip, and you're realizing a cut here's a death sentence without this vile fix. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding worms. And you're trying not to vomit. The church, as always, has little to say. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering as God's will, not worms as his cure. And you're muttering about monks who'd rather kiss relics than face this. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might pay for a surgeon's cleaner knife, but you're stuck with this healer, her jar a squirming pharmacy. You're hearing her tales of maggot miracles, like a knight saved from a leg wound. But you're skeptical, recalling Meg's parsley and stew bones that promised more than they delivered. You're clenching your jaw as a maggot burrows deeper, the itch maddening, and you're wondering if survival's worth this crawling horror. The custom's a grim necessity. You're noticing the healer's other patients, a tanner with a gashed hand, a child with a scabby knee, all waiting for their own wormy dose. Their faces pale but resigned, like you dodging pot splashes or chewing gritty stew. You're hearing whispers of other cures, leeches, ash pastes, but maggots are the healer's specialty. And you're stuck with them, the wound's pain dulling but the disgust sharp. You're thinking of the town's shared miseries, lice, bad breath, rancid food, and you're seeing this as another badge of endurance, like scraping teeth with twigs. You're trying to breathe through your mouth, the hot stench overwhelming, and you're praying the worms finish before your nerve does. There's a flicker of awe, though. You're watching the healer's steady hands, her care a faint echo of the wise woman's boiled water we admired in that plague village. And it's a moment of grit, like picking lice by the fire. You're catching your spouse's worried glance from the door, her nod urging you to hold on, and it's a spark, like Jack's grin over stew. You're feeling the maggots work, the wound cleaner already, and you're grudgingly impressed. Even if your skin crawls, you're thanking the healer, her smile crooked but kind, and you're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's as gross as the disease. As you stumble outside, the maggot's wriggle lingers, a reminder of a town that fights filth with filth. You're carrying a mix of nausea and respect, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one worm at a time. The street's muck awaits, but you're tougher now, even if your arm begs to differ. You're staggering out of the healer's hut, the wriggle of maggots still haunting your bandaged arm, as the town's familiar stench chamber pot splashes, unwashed bodies, and midden heaps hits you like a slap. The air's sharp with spring dampness, mixing with the sour memory of last night's sewer soup and the itch of lice you've learned to endure. Now, you're back in the healer's den, this time for a nagging fever, and she's holding a clay cup filled with a cloudy liquid that smells suspiciously like a latrine. In the Middle Ages, urine was a bizarre medical staple, used to diagnose and even treat ailments, a disgusting custom that makes maggot therapy seem almost tame. You're clutching your cloak, the healer's grin unnerving, as you dive into the revolting world of urine-based cures, where what comes out of the bladder goes right back in. Mainstream history tells us that medieval medicine leaned heavily on uroscopy, studying urine's color, smell, and taste to diagnose illnesses, with healers also prescribing it as a drink or salve for everything from fevers to wounds. You're staring at the cup, its contents swirling yellow, as the healer swirls it like a fine wine, muttering about your hot humors. Historical records show that physicians, following ancient Greek texts, believed urine carried the body's secrets, and some even sipped it to confirm their findings. You're gagging at the thought, your stomach already uneasy from the market's rancid stew, and you're wondering how anyone trusts a cure that smells like the street's worst puddles. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers claimed virgin's urine, from young, unmarried women, was especially potent, thought to be purer and blessed by God. You're catching the healer's wink as she boasts her bruised source, a local lass, and you're recoiling, recalling old Meg's dubious to bones and lice pride. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual nonsense or a way to justify using whatever was handy, but you're betting it's both, especially in a town where filth, like those chamber pot tosses, is just life. You're gripping the cup, its warmth unsettling, and you're praying you can choke it down without losing last night's meal. The hut's a shrine to this grim practice. You're watching the healer line up jars of urine, each a different shade d'amber. Green, cloud her shelves a grotesque rainbow that rivals the market's fly-covered meat. She's sniffing yours now, nodding sagely, and you're fighting the urge to bolt. The maggots crawl suddenly preferable. You're thinking of the crowded market, where stinks blend, and you're realizing urine's just another ingredient. Here, like the lice in your hair or the grit on your teeth. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's brewing medicine, and you're trying not to imagine whose bladder filled your cup. The church, predictably, stays silent. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering over sanitation, and you're muttering about monks who'd kiss relics but gag at this, though you're betting they didn't. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might afford herbal tonics, but you're stuck with this peasant potion. The healer's insistence as firm as her grip on the jar. You're hearing her tales of urine miracles, a fever cured, a rash cleared, but you're skeptical. Recalling the parsley tooth fix and maggot promises that barely worked. You're lifting the cup, the smell hitting like a punch, and you're wondering if survival's worth this liquid horror. The custom's a town fixture. You're noticing other patients, a tanner sipping a similar brew, a woman rubbing urine on a burn, all grimacing but obedient, like you dodging pot splashes or chewing rancid stew. You're hearing whispers of urine as a cure-all, eye drops, skin sobs, even gargles, and you're shuddering. The healer's jar collection, a testament to the town's endless supply. You're trying a trick she suggests, mixing it with ale to soften the taste, but it's like flavoring mud with more mud, and you're choking it down. Eyes watering, you're thinking of the street's waste, the market's grime, and you're seeing this as another grim badge, like scraping teeth or picking lice. There's a flicker of resilience, though. You're catching your spouse's worried glance from the door. Her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care we saw in the plague village. And it's a moment of grit, like sharing stew's sour bites. You're gagging but swallowing. Jack's curious stare pushing you to finish. And it's a spark. Surviving this is a win, like outlasting the market's reek. You're thanking the healer, her crooked smile oddly kind. And you're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's as foul as the sickness. As you stumble outside, the urine's aftertaste lingers, a reminder of a town that turns waste into wisdom. You're carrying a mix of nausea and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one sip at a time. The street's muck awaits, but you're tougher now. Even if your stomach begs to differ. You're stumbling through the town's muddy lanes, the bitter aftertaste of the healer's urine potion still coating your tongue, mingling with the familiar reek of chamber pot splashes, and the itch of lice you're too weary to scratch. The spring air's damp chill does little to clear your head, and your fever's stubborn hum lingers, barely dulled by yesterday's vile brew. Now, you're back in the healer's hut, sprawled on a creaky bench, as she sharpens a blade and sets out a bowl, ready to bleed you to balance your humors. In the Middle Ages, bloodletting was a gruesome staple, a disgusting custom that makes maggot therapy and urine swigs seem almost gentle. You're clutching your cloak, the healer's calm unnerving, as you brace for the gory ritual where your veins pay the price for medieval medicine's madness. Mainstream history tells us that bloodletting, rooted in ancient Greek humoral theory, was a go-to cure for everything from fevers to melancholy. with healers believing too much blood or bad blood caused illness. You're watching the healer, her blade glinting as she eyes your arm, the same one the maggots crawled over, now marked for a new ordeal. Historical records show that barbers and physicians alike sliced veins or applied leeches, draining pints, to restore balance, often weakening or killing patients. You're wincing, the memory of the sewer soup's sour bite and the market stench making you question this cure. And you're wondering if you'll walk out or be carried. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers consulted star charts to pick the lucky vein, believing a cut under Venus's light would cleanse your soul as well as your blood. You're catching the healer's mutter about the moon's phase, her finger tracing a vein like it's a cosmic map, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's lucky stabone and her lice-loving pride. Historians still argue whether this was astrology or a way to dodge blame for bad outcomes. But you're betting it's a dodge, your arms throbbing, and no stars saving you now. You're clenching your fist, the blade's edge hovering, and you're praying the heavens know more than she does. The hut's a bloody stage. You're feeling the blade's cold bite, a sharp sting as blood trickles into the bowl, its iron tang mixing with the hut's herbal reek. The healer's humming, her hands steady as she ties a cloth to slow the flow. But you're dizzy, the room tilting like the street after a pot splash. You're thinking of the market's sweaty crowds, where fevers spread, and you're realizing this cure's as risky as the disease, like the urine you choked down or the lice you crushed. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth killed. Here, it's blood, and you're trying not to faint as the bowl fills. The church, as ever, is no ally. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering as God's test, not blades as his cure. And you're muttering about monks who'd kiss relics but flinch at this, though you're betting they didn't. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might hire fancier barbers with cleaner knives. But you're stuck with this healer, her bowl already half full of your life. You're hearing her tales of blood miracles, a fever broken, a man revived, but you're skeptical, recalling the maggot promises and urine's foul lies. You're gripping the bench, the cut burning, and you're wondering if health's worth this gory price. The custom's a town ritual. You're noticing other patients, a tanner waiting his turn, a woman with a bandaged wrist all pale but resigned, like you chewing rancid stew or dodging street muck. You're hearing whispers of bloodletting for headaches, love sickness, even bad luck, and you're shuddering. The healer's blade collection, a testament to the town's faith in red remedies. You're trying a trick she suggests, breathing slow to keep the humors calm. But it's like calming a storm with a whisper, and you're swaying, vision blurring. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, bad breath, grim food, and you're seeing this as another grim badge, like scraping teeth with ash. There's a flicker of grit, though. You're catching your spouse's worried glance from the door, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care in that plague village. And it's a moment of endurance, like picking lice by the fire. You're clinging to Jack's voice outside, his chatter a spark, and it's a vow you'll survive this, blade or no blade. You're thanking the healer, her crooked smile oddly reassuring, and you're staggering out, the bandage tight, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's as brutal as the hurt. As you step into the street, the blood's loss lingers, a dizzy reminder of a town that fights sickness with savagery. You're carrying a mix of nausea and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One cut at a time, the market stench awaits, but you're tougher now, even if your arm begs to differ. You're limping through the town's crowded streets, the bandage on your arm still sore from yesterday's bloodletting. The dizzy hum of lost blood mixing with the familiar stench of chamber pot splashes and market muck that clings to your cloak. The spring sun does little to mask the reek of unwashed bodies or the sour memory of urine potions and maggot wriggles. But now you're weaving toward the church, drawn by the promise of a saint's relica bone said to heal your lingering fever. In the Middle Ages, kissing holy relics was a sacred yet germy ritual, a disgusting custom where faith meant sharing spit with a crowd of pilgrims. You're clutching a coin, your skepticism sharp as the healer's blade, as you dive into the grim world of relic kissing, where devotion and disease dance in a packed, sweaty pew. Mainstream history tells us that relic veneration was central to medieval Christianity, with believers kissing bones, hair, or scraps of saints' clothing to seek miracles, despite the risk of spreading infections like plague or leprosy in cramped churches. You're squeezing into a pew, the air thick with incense and the musky odor of too many bodies, as a priest holds up a finger bone supposedly St. Cuthbert's encased in a silver reliquary. Historical records show that pilgrims flocked to shrines, their lips touching relics kissed by thousands, oblivious to germs in a world that blamed sin, not spit, for sickness. You're eyeing the bone, your fever pulsing, and you're wondering if salvation's worth the slobber of strangers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a relic's holy sweat, the dampness from countless kisses, carried extra blessings, making the wettest bones the most potent. You're watching a woman press her lips to the reliquary, her fervor leaving a sheen, and you're gagging, recalling old Meg's lice pride and the healer's urine jar. Historians still argue whether this was pure devotion or a desperate grab at hope, but you're betting it's both, especially in a town where filth, like those street middens, is just faith's backdrop. You're clutching your coin, the priest's expectant glance heavy, and you're praying your kiss doesn't come with a cough. The church is a germy crucible. You're shuffling forward, the crowd's breath hot and sour, like the market's sweaty haze, as pilgrims, tanners, weavers, a coughing beggar line up for their turn. You're feeling the bones pull, its silver glinting like a promise, but the reliquary's surface is slick, kissed by lips that might have sipped sewer stew or dodged lice. You're thinking of the Black Death village, where fleas spread doom. Here, it's spit, and you're realizing this ritual's as risky as bloodletting's blade or maggots crawl. You're recalling those sermons, preaching relics as God's grace, but you're wondering if grace includes the fever you're trying to shake. The church fuels the frenzy. You're hearing the priest chant of Cuthbert's miracles, blindness cured, fevers broken, and you're torn. Your doubts from the plague's faith-tested nights clashing with the crowd's fervor. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might pray from private chapels, but you're shoulder to shoulder with peasants, their devotion as rank as their tunics. You're catching whispers of relic thefts, where desperate pilgrims swipe holy bits, and you're skeptical, recalling the market's rosewater scams and urine's false cures. You're stepping up, the bone's damp metal close, and you're bracing for a kiss that feels more like a dare than devotion. The ritual's a shared ordeal. You're pressing your lips to the reliquary, the cold silver slick with a faint tang of sweat and grime, and you're shuddering, the crowd's murmurs urging you on. You're noticing others, some licking eagerly, others barely brushing, and you're feeling the same grim bond as dodging pot splashes or chewing tooth twigs. A town united by its gross faith. You're trying a trick the priest suggests, praying hard to taste the saint's power, but all you taste is metal and regret, and you're pulling back, wiping your mouth on your sleeve. You're thinking of the street's waste, the hovels, lice, and you're seeing this as another badge of endurance, like swallowing rancid stew. There's a flicker of hope, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the pews. Her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care. And it's a moment of grit, like surviving bloodletting's days. You're thinking of Jack, waiting outside, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing this kiss will work, if only for him. You're dropping your coin, the priest's smile greedy, and you're slipping out, the church's incense fading, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where faith's as filthy as the cure. As you step into the street, the reliquaries. Damp lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks grace in grime. You're carrying a mix of revulsion and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One kiss at a time, the market stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your lips beg to differ. You're weaving through the town's bustling streets, the spring sun doing little to mask the stench of chamber pot splashes and market muck. Your lips still tingling from the germy kiss on St. Cuthbert's relic that left your fever unshaken. The air's thick with the reek of unwashed bodies and the memory of bloodletting sting. Urine potions and maggot wriggles, but now you're standing in a crowded square, where a bizarre trial unfolds. A corpse, propped up like a grim puppet, is being judged for a crime. In the Middle Ages, corpse trials were a creepy custom, a disgusting ritual where the dead faced justice in a spectacle as foul as the town's sewers. You're clutching your cloak, the crowd's murmurs unnerving, as you dive into this macabre world, where even death doesn't escape the law's gory stage. Mainstream history tells us that medieval Europe occasionally held trials for corpses, especially in cases of suspected murder or treason, to settle disputes or appease the living, with the dead testifying through ritual or proxy. You're staring at the body of a merchant, accused of poisoning a rival slumped in a chair, his gray face sagging, his shroud stained with decay's first bloom. Historical records describe such trials, like the 9th century cadaver synod, where a pope's corpse was judged as a mix of legal formality and superstitious theater, spreading germs and dread. You're edging closer, the corpse's stench hitting like the hovel's sewer stew, and you're wondering how justice smells this bad. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a corpse's wounds would bleed afresh in the killer's presence, a divine sign to prove guilt, making the trial a bloody show. You're watching a priest sprinkle holy water on the merchant's shroud, his chant claiming the body's truth will speak, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's to bones and the relic's sweaty sheen. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a way to rig verdicts, but you're betting it's a spectacle to quiet the mob, like the plague village's scapegoating. You're holding your breath, the crowd's eyes on the corpse, and you're praying no blood flows, if only to end this faster. The square's a grim theater. You're surrounded by townsfolk, bakers, tanners, a coughing beggar gawking as the corpse sways, its chair creaking under the weight of decay. You're smelling the rot, sharp and sweet, worse than the street's middens or the healer's maggot jar. And you're fighting a gag, the relic kisses spit now a fond memory. You're thinking of the market's sweaty chaos, where life thrived. Here, death's the star. And you're realizing this trial's as risky as kissing bones, spreading whatever festers in that shroud. You're recalling the Black Death village, where graves held answers. Here, they're dug up for show, and you're trying not to bolt. The church drives the madness. You're hearing the priest invoke divine judgment, his voice echoing those sin-obsessed sermons, as if God cares about a dead man's debts. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might settle scores with gold, but you're stuck in this peasant circus, where justice means parading rot. You're catching whispers of corpse oracles, where the dead silence seals guilt. And you're skeptical, recalling the urine cure's lies and the bloodletting's haze. You're watching a rival merchant, the accuser, glare at the body, and you're bracing for the priest's verdict. The crowd's tension thick as the corpses stink. The ritual's a shared revulsion. You're noticing others shift uneasily, some pray. Some jeer like you chewing rancid stew or dodging lice. A town bound by its grim rites. You're hearing the priest declare the corpse guilty, no blood needed, and you're shuddering. As they drag it to a pyre, the stench worsening with movement. You're trying a trick a neighbor suggests, holding a cloth to your nose. But it's as useless as your lavender sprig. And you're gagging. The trial's end a relief tinged with disgust. You're thinking of the street's pot tosses, the hovel's pests. And you're seeing this as another badge of endurance, like scraping teeth with ash. There's a flicker of awe, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the crowd. Her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care. And it's a moment of grit, like surviving the healer's blade. You're thinking of Jack, safe at home, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to spare him this spectacle's weight. You're slipping away, the pyre's smoke rising, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where even the dead face judgment, and the living pay the price. As you leave the square, the corpse's stench lingers, a reminder of a town that courts justice in decay. You're carrying a mix of horror and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one grim trial at a time. The market's chaos calls, but you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're hurrying away from the town square, the acrid smoke of the corpse trial's pyre still stinging your eyes. Its rotting stench blending with the familiar reek of street muck and unwashed bodies. That's become your daily haze. The spring breeze offers no relief, carrying echoes of the relic kiss's spit, the bloodletting's iron tang, and the sewer stew's sour bite. But now you're passing a farmer's hovel, where a strange ritual unfolds. A woman smears animal dung on her doorpost, muttering about luck and protection. In the Middle Ages, using dung for charms was a disgusting custom, as grim as maggot cures or urine potions, rooted in a world where filth was both curse and cure. You're clutching your cloak, the farmer's grin unsettling, as you dive into the smelly world of dung-based superstitions, where manure's a talisman and revulsion's just another day. Mainstream history tells us that medieval peasants often used animal dung, cow, horse, even pig as a folk remedy or charm, believing it warded off evil spirits, boosted crops, or healed ailments, a practice tied to agrarian life and scarce resources. You're watching the woman, her hands caked with cow manure, spread it in a crude cross, her eyes bright with faith. Historical records show such customs were widespread, especially in rural areas, where dung's abundance made it a go-to for everything from fertility rites to plague protection. Despite its obvious risks, you're stepping back, the smell hitting like a wall, and you're wondering how anyone trusts luck that stinks this bad. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed fresh dung, especially from a holy cow fed on church land, carried divine power, making its stench a sacred shield. You're catching the woman's nod as she boasts her cow grazed near the priory, and you're gagging, recalling old Meg's lucky stabone and the relic's germy sheen. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual desperation or practical recycling, but you're betting it's both. In a town where chamber pot tosses and midden heaps make filth a fact of life, you're holding your breath. The dungs reek worse than the market's fish stall, and you're praying her luck doesn't rub off literally. The hovel's a shrine to this grim ritual. You're peering inside, where a clay pot holds more dung, mixed with herbs for a healing paste, and you're wincing, the sight rivaling the healer's maggot jar or urine rainbow. you're spotting a child, smeared with a dung streak for health, playing in the dirt, and you're thinking of Jack, safe at home, hoping he never faces this cure. You're recalling the market's sweaty chaos, where stinks were shared. Here, dung's a personal choice, and you're realizing it's as common as lice or gritty teeth, a grim thread in the town's tapestry of filth. You're dodging a stray smear on the doorframe, and you're trying not to retch. The church, as usual, turns a blind eye. You're remembering those sermons, preaching purity while ignoring street waste, and you're muttering about priests who'd kiss relics but balk at this, though you're betting some didn't. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might scoff at dung charms, their perfumes masking the world's rot. But you're stuck with this peasant magic, the woman's faith as firm as the healer's blade. You're hearing her tales of dung miracles, crops thriving, fevers fading, but you're skeptical, recalling the urine bruise lies and the corpse trials farce. You're edging away, the smell clinging, and you're wondering if luck's worth this foul price. The custom's a village staple. You're noticing other hovels with dung crosses, farmers rubbing manure on plow blades or sick cows, their hands as caked as yours after digging in the street's muck. You're hearing whispers of dung as a cure-all poultices for sores, charms for storms, and you're shuddering, the woman's pot a testament to the town's endless supply. You're trying a trick she suggests, sniffing lavender to balance the stench, but your sprig's gone, and the air's all cow. You're thinking of the town's shared battle spot, dodging, slurping, relic kissing, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like chewing tooth twigs. There's a flicker of respect, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the lane, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the bloodletting's haze. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to keep him from dung-smeared doors, even if you admire the woman's stubborn faith. You're nodding to her, her grin oddly warm, and you're hurrying off, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where filth's a charm, and survival's the only magic. As you leave the hovel, the dung's reek lingers, a reminder of a town that finds hope in its own waste. You're carrying a mix of nausea and resilience, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one smear at a time. The market stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're trudging through the town's bustling market, the spring air thick with the stench of fish stalls and chamber pot splashes, the lingering reek of that dung-smeared doorpost, still haunting your nose alongside the memory of relic kisses and bloodletting sting. The crowd's chatter drowns out the itch of lice, but now you're pausing at a butcher's stall, where a slab of pork, suspiciously green at the edges, is being doused with costly spices to mask its rot. In the Middle Ages, eating spoiled meat was a grim custom, disguised with pepper and cloves to fool the tongue, a disgusting practice as rank as urine potions or sewer stew. You're clutching your basket, the butcher's grin to eager, as you dive into the foul world of rancid feasts, where decay's just another flavor in a town that thrives on filth. Mainstream history tells us that medieval food preservation was shaky salting, and smoking often failed, leaving meat to rot, especially for peasants who couldn't afford fresh cuts. So cooks masked spoilage with expensive spices like saffron or cinnamon. You're eyeing the pork, its grayish sheen barely hidden by a dusting of pepper, and you're gagging, the smell hitting like the hovel's midden heap. Historical records show that spoiled food caused rampant illness, from stomach cramps to deadly infections, but hunger and scarcity made it a risk worth taking. You're swallowing hard, The market's sweaty haze reminding you of unwashed bodies. And you're wondering how anyone chews this without a cast iron gut. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed eating blessed rotten meat, sprinkled with holy water, could ward off evil spirits, turning spoilage into a sacred act. You're catching the butcher's wink as he mutters about a priest's sprinkle on his wares. And you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's dung charms and the holy urine brew. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a merchant's trick to sell bad goods, but you're betting it's a hustle, especially in a town where chamber pot tosses are routine. You're sniffing the pork, its spiced crust failing to hide the rot, and you're praying your coin buys something less cursed. The market's a gallery of grim eats. You're passing stalls with fly-covered fish, moldy bread, and cheese that smells like the street's worst puddles, each doused with herbs or spices to trick buyers. You're spotting a woman haggle for a hunk of mutton, its surface slick with age, and you're wincing, thinking of the sewer stew's greasy bite and the maggot jar's wriggle. You're realizing food here's a gamble, like kissing a relic's germy sheen or dodging lice, and you're clutching your basket tighter, hoping to avoid a night of retching. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth fed plague. Here, it's feeding you, and you're trying not to bolt. The church, as ever, is silent. You're remembering those sermons, preaching fasting over flavor, as if a pure soul makes rancid pork safe. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, feast on fresh game. Their spice is a status flex, not a necessity, while you're stuck with this peasant's gamble. The butcher's knife carving questionable slabs. You're hearing him boast of spiced miracles, sick kids cured by his peppered beef. But you're skeptical, recalling the bloodletting's lies and dung's false luck. You're bartering for a small piece, the price steep for rot, and you're bracing for a chew that's more dare than dinner. The custom's a town tradition. You're noticing others by the same tanners, weavers. A kid with a coin all pinching their noses but taking the meat, like you slurping grim stew or scraping teeth with twigs. You're hearing whispers of spice tricks cloves for chicken, ginger for fish, and you're shuddering. The butcher's stall a testament to the town's hunger for anything edible. You're trying a tip he suggests, boiling the pork with ale to purify it. But you're dubious. The memory of urine. Ale still sour. You're thinking of the street's pot chaos, the hovel's pests. And you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like kissing a saint's bone. There's a flicker of defiance, though. You're catching your spouse's glance across the market, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the corpse trial's stench. You're thinking of Jack, waiting at home, his grin a spark, and you're vowing to make this meat edible, if only for him. You're handing over your coin, the butcher's smile sly, and you're hurrying off, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where supper's a battle, and rot's just another spice. As you leave the stall, the pork swift lingers, a reminder of a town that dresses decay in luxury. You're carrying a mix of nausea and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one bite at a time. The street's filth calls, but you're tougher now, even if your stomach begs to differ. You're trudging back to your hovel, the rancid pork from the market tucked in your basket, its peppery crust doing little to mask the whiff of rot. That joins the town's ever-present stench of chamber pot splashes and unwashed bodies. The spring dusk settles, heavy with the memory of dung charms, relic kisses, and the bloodletting's dizzy haze. But now you're sitting at your wobbly table, staring at a treacherous stale bread slab that serves as your plate, soaked with the greasy dregs of a shared stew. In the Middle Ages, eating off trenchers was a messy custom, a disgusting ritual where communal slop turned bread into a soggy, germy sponge. You're clutching your spoon, the stew's dubious aroma rising, as you dive into the grim world of trenchers, where meals are as foul as the street's muck or the healer's urine brew. Mainstream history tells us that trenchers, thick slices of day-old bread, were standard medieval tableware for peasants and lower classes, absorbing stews or sauces before being eaten, shared, or tossed to dogs, spreading germs in a world oblivious to hygiene. You're poking the trencher, its crust soft and slick with broth, already mingling with the sweat and spit of your family's hands. Historical records show that shared trenchers, passed around tables, were breeding grounds for disease, especially in crowded hovels like yours, where washing was a dream. You're sniffing the stew, a cousin to that sewer soup, and you're wondering how hunger keeps winning over disgust in this filthy town. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a trencher blessed by a priest's touch could purify the meal, making its soggy mess a holy act, despite the grime. You're recalling old Meg's claim that her trencher, grazed by a monk's sleeve, saved her from a fever, and you're grimacing, thinking of her lice pride and the corpse trials. Stench. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a way to stomach the mess, but you're betting it's an excuse, like the holy pork at the market. You're eyeing the trencher's soggy edge, Jack's eager spoon dipping in, and you're praying no one's cough joins the broth. The hovel's a stage for this grim feast. You're sharing the trencher with your family, its surface a swamp of stew bits of that questionable pork, wilted greens, and a sheen of grease that catches the firelight. You're scooping a bite, the bread mushy and warm, tasting of everyone's fingers, and you're wincing, the relic kisses germy spit now a fond memory. You're thinking of the market's fly-covered stalls, where this stew's makings festered, and you're realizing trenchers are just another link in the town's chain of filth, like lice or street puddles. You're recalling that Black Death village, where shared spaces spread plague. Here, it's just dinner, and you're trying not to gag. The church, as usual, offers no clarity. You're remembering those sermons, preaching communal love but ignoring communal grime, as if a shared trencher's a virtue, not a risk. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, use silver plates, their trenchers tossed to servants, while you're stuck with this bread, its crust crumbling under your spoon. You're hearing Meg's tales of trencher miracles, sick kids revived by a holy slice, but you're skeptical, recalling the dung cross's lies and the urine brew's burn. You're passing the trencher to your spouse, her grimace matching yours, and you're bracing for a bite that's more sludge than sustenance. The custom's a town ritual. You're noticing neighbors eat the same tanners, weavers, kids all huddled over trenchers, their spoons clashing in shared pots, like you dodging pot splashes or chewing rancid meat. You're hearing whispers of trencher etiquette: don't spit, don't double dip, but it's a joke in a hovel where hands are as clean as the street's muck. You're trying a trick Meg suggests, soaking the trencher less to keep it firm, but it's still a soggy mess, and you're chewing grimly, the stew's grease coating your throat. You're thinking of the town's shared battles: lice, bad breath, grim cures, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like kissing a saint's bone. There's a flicker of warmth, though. You're catching Jack's giggle as he flicks a soggy crumb, his joy a spark in the hovel's gloom, like surviving the maggot jar's crawl. You're sharing a look with your spouse, her spoon steady despite the mess, and it's a moment of endurance, like her posy wearing Karen. That plague village. You're swallowing another bite, the trencher's mush a testament to your family's grit, and you're vowing to make it through, germs or not. You're setting the bowl aside, stomach uneasy but full, and you're bracing for the next revolting Custom in a world where even plates are a fight. As the fire dims, the trencher's grease lingers, a reminder of a town that dines on decay. You're carrying a mix of nausea and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one slurp at a time. The hovel's quiet, but your gut's not, and you're tougher now, even if your taste buds beg to differ. You're wiping greasy stew from your chin, the soggy trencher's remnants still clinging to your fingers as you sit in the hovel's smoky gloom. The spring night's chill seeping through the walls. The town's relentless filth chamber pot splashes, rancid pork, and the corpse trial stench has hardened you. But now you're limping to a barber's shop, your fever spiking and a tooth throbbing worse than the bloodlettings cut. In the Middle Ages, barber surgeons were the grim fixers of both hair and flesh, wielding the same bloody tools for trims and amputations. A disgusting custom as vile as maggot cures or dung charms. You're clutching your cloak, the barber's grin to sharp, as you dive into the gruesome world of his dual trade, where a haircut might end in a hacked limb. Mainstream history tells us that barber surgeons, untrained beyond apprenticeships, handled everything from shaves to surgeries in medieval Europe. Their shops a bloody crossroads where rusty blades spread infection as often as they cured. You're sitting on a creaky stool, the barber sharpening a blade crusted with dried blood, his apron stiff with stains that rival the market's midden heaps. Historical records show these men yanked teeth, lanced boils, and sawed bones with tools barely cleaned, causing more pain than relief in a world without anesthesia or germ theory. You're eyeing the blade, your toothache pulsing, and you're wondering if you leave with a trim or a stump. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some barbers believed a lucky blade, used on a saint's feast day, could ward off evil during surgery, making their cuts holy despite the gore. You're catching the barber's mutter about St. John's blessing on his knife, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holies to bone and the relic's germy kiss. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a dodge for botched jobs, but you're betting it's a comfort for patients like you, facing a blade that's trimmed beards and boils alike. You're clenching your jaw, the tooth's pain sharper than the barber's edge, and you're praying his luck holds. The shop's a gory mess. You're surrounded by tools, razors, saws, a basin of murky water strewn on a table. There stains a map of past patients' woes. You're smelling blood and sweat, worse than the hovel's sewer stew, as the barber probes your mouth. His fingers rank from a morning shave. You're thinking of the market's fly-covered meat, where filth thrived. Here, it's the blade. And you're realizing this cure's as risky as urine bruise or trencher slop. You're recalling the Black Death village, where infection killed. Here, it's waiting in the barber's grime, and you're trying not to flinch as he grips your tooth. The church offers no solace. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering over sanitation, as if a clean blade's less holy than a saint's bone. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might hire physicians with fancier tools. But you're stuck with this barber, his knife as dual purpose as the town's trenchers. You're hearing him boast of surgical miracles, limbs saved, teeth yanked, but you're skeptical, recalling the dung cross's lies and the bloodlettings haze. You're bracing as he pulls, the tooth's roots snapping with a wet crunch. And you're swallowing a scream, the pain of fire that drowns the fever. The custom's a town fixture. You're noticing other customers, a tanner with a gashed leg, a boy needing a shave, all waiting for the same blade. Their faces pale but resigned, like you slurping grim stew or dodging lice. You're hearing whispers of barber feet's boils drained, bones set, and you're shuddering. The shop's bloody floor a testament to the town's trust in gory fixes. You're trying a trick he suggests, biting a cloth to ease the pain. but it's as useless as the relic's prayer, and you're spitting blood, visions swimming. You're thinking of the street's pot chaos, the hovel's pests, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like chewing rancid pork. There's a flicker of respect, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the door, her, not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the corpse trials reek. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to walk out for him, tooth or no tooth. You're thanking the barber, his crooked smile oddly kind, and you're staggering out, the wound throbbing, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's a cut above the hurt. As you step into the street, the blood's tang lingers, a reminder of a town that fixes flesh with filth. You're carrying a mix of pain and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One slice at a time. The market's stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your mouth begs to differ. You're weaving through the town's muddy lanes, the spring air heavy with the stench of chamber pot splashes and market rot. Your mouth still throbbing from the barber surgeon's tooth yanking, the bloody tang mixing with memories of rancid pork, dung charms, and the corpse trial's grim reek. The sun's low glow offers no relief as you approach a rickety bridge over the river, where a public latrine, a splintered bench with holes looms, its stink rivaling the hovel's sewer stew. In the Middle Ages, shared latrines were a foul necessity, a disgusting custom where privacy was a myth and the air was a cloud of human waste. You're clutching your cloak, the river's murky flow below, as you dive into the grim world of public privies, where squatting's a group effort and filth's just another neighbor. Mainstream history tells us that medieval towns relied on public latrines, often built over rivers or cesspits, where people of all classes relieved themselves side by side, spreading germs in a world that saw waste as a nuisance, not a health hazard. You're eyeing the latrine, its wooden bench slick with use, as a tanner and a baker squat, their grunts mingling with the river's gurgle. Historical records show these privies, packed and rarely cleaned, were hotbeds for infections, worsened by the same poor hygiene that fueled lice and bad teeth. You're hesitating, the urge pressing but the stench overwhelming, and you're wondering how anyone endures this without gagging. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed sitting on a latrine during a full moon could purge evil humors, making the communal squat a spiritual act. Despite the filth, you're catching a woman's mutter about the moon's cleansing light as she takes her spot, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holy dung cross and the barber's lucky blade. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a way to dignify the indignity, but you're betting it's a coping mechanism for a town where chamber pot tosses are the norm. You're inching toward the bench, the river's reek rising, and you're praying the moon's magic skips you entirely. The latrine's a grim stage. You're squeezing onto the bench, the wood creaking under you, as the tanner's elbow brushes. Yours, his odor a mix of leather and sweat that rivals the privy's own. You're holding your breath. The stench a wall of decay, worse than the market's fish stalls or the healer's maggot jar. And you're realizing this is intimacy at its worst. No walls, no shame, just shared misery. You're thinking of the hovel's trencher slop, where germs were a side dish. Here, they're the main course, and you're trying not to imagine what's splashing below. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding dread, and you're hurrying to finish. The church, as ever, is no help. You're remembering those sermons, preaching purity of soul over body, as if a clean heart makes this cesspool holy. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might use private privies, their waste whisked away. But you're stuck with this public bench, the river below a stew of the town's leavings. You're hearing the woman boast of latrine blessings, claiming her squat cured a fever, but you're skeptical, recalling the relic kisses lies and the urine bruise burn. You're balancing on the edge, the bench's splinters biting, and you're wondering if dignity's a luxury you'll never afford, the customs a town ritual. You're noticing others join weavers, kids, a coughing beggar all squatting in turn, their faces set like you chewing rancid stew or dodging lice. You're hearing whispers of latrine etiquette, don't linger, don't stare, but it's a joke in a space where privacy's as rare as a bath. You're trying a trick the tanner suggests, humming to ease the flow, but it's as useless as the trencher's etiquette, and you're grimacing. The rivers plop a grim soundtrack. You're thinking of the street's pot chaos, the hovel's gritty teeth, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like surviving the barber's blade. There's a flicker of camaraderie, though. You're catching the baker's nod, his grunt a shared complaint, and it's a moment of endurance, like picking lice by the fire or sharing a trencher's mess. You're thinking of Jack, safe at home, and you're vowing to spare him this bench's indignity. His chatter a spark in your mind. You're hurrying off, the latrine's stench clinging, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where even relief's a public ordeal, and filth's the only constant. As you cross the bridge, the river's reek lingers, a reminder of a town that squats in its own waste. You're carrying a mix of disgust and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one squat at a time. The market stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're hurrying away from the public latrine's stinking bench, the river's foul reek still clinging to your cloak as you weave through the town's muddy lanes. The spring dusk heavy with the memory of chamber pot splashes, rancid pork, and the barber surgeon's bloody blade. The market's distant hum fades, but your fever's stubborn grip tightens, urging you back to the healer's hut, where a new remedy awaits. Wearing a sweat-soaked shirt from a sick man, believed to sweat out your illness. In the Middle Ages, this was a disgusting custom, as grim as maggot cures or public privies, tying healing to the rank essence of another's body. You're clutching your basket, the healer's calm unnerving, as you dive into the revolting world of sweat-soaked cures, where stench is medicine and disgust is the price of hope. Mainstream history tells us that medieval medicine often used sympathetic remedies, like wearing a sick person's clothing, based on the belief that their sweat could transfer health or expel disease through shared humors. You're staring at the shirt, a dingy linen rag reeking of sour sweat, draped over the healer's bench like a relic from the corpse trial we gagged at. Historical records show such practices, common among peasants, relied on the idea that bodily fluids like the urine we sipped or the blood we spilled held power, though they often spread infection instead. You're wrinkling your nose, the fever's heat pulsing, and you're wondering if this shirt's cure is worse than the latrine's communal stench. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers claimed a shirt worn during a saint's feast day carried extra healing sweat, making its stench a divine gift, not just a gross one. You're catching the healer's nod as she boasts the shirt's owner prayed at St. Cuthbert's shrine, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holy dung cross and the latrine's moonlit purge. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a way to justify using filthy rags, but you're betting it's a dodge, like the barber's lucky blade. In a town where filth's a fact of life, you're lifting the shirt, its damp weight heavy, and you're praying its stink doesn't kill you before the fever does. The hut's a shrine to this grim ritual. You're slipping the shirt over your tunic, its clammy fabric sticking to your skin. The smell a mix of sweat and mold that rivals the market's rotten meat. You're gagging, the sensation like lice crawling or the trencher's greasy slop. As the healer ties it tight, muttering about sweating the evil out, you're thinking of the relic kiss's germy sheen, where spit spread faith, here, it's sweat. And you're realizing this cure's as risky as the public latrines. Bench, reading whatever festers in the cloth. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth fueled plague. Here, it's fueling hope. And you're trying not to retch. The church, as always, stays vague. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering as God's will, not sweat as his cure. Though your betting monks wore their own rank robes for penance, nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might scoff at such peasant cures. Their fevers treated with spiced wine, but you're stuck with this shirt. Its stench as personal as the healer's urine jar. You're hearing her tales of sweat miracles, fevers broken, chills banished, but you're skeptical. Recalling the maggot jar's lies and the relic's damp betrayal, you're adjusting the shirt. It's itch maddening, and you're wondering if health's worth this rank embrace. The custom's a town oddity. You're noticing other patients, a weaver with a cough, a boy with a rash waiting for their own sweaty rags. Their faces set like you slurping sewer stew or squatting at the latrine. You're hearing whispers of sweat cures for gout, plague, even love sickness, and you're shuddering. The healer's pile of shirts a testament to the town's endless ailments. You're trying a trick she suggests, breathing deep to absorb the sweat's power, but it's like inhaling the street's midden heap, and you're coughing. Fever spiking. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, germy kisses, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of resolve, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the door, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the barber's wrenching pull. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to wear this shirt for him. Fever or no fever, you're thanking the healer, her smile crooked but kind, and you're stumbling out, the shirt's stench clinging, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's as foul as the hurt. As you step into the street, the sweat's reek lingers, a reminder of a town that finds medicine in misery. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one whiff at a time. The market's chaos calls, but you're tougher now, even if your skin begs to differ. You're shuffling through the town's muddy lanes, the spring air thick with the stench of chamber pot splashes and market rot. The sweat-soaked shirt from last night's healer visit, clinging to your skin like a rank second hide. It's sour. Reek, a grim reminder of urine potions, rancid trenchers, and the latrine's communal fug. Your fever's dulled but lingers, and now you're back in the healer's hut, where she's holding a live toad, its slimy body squirming as she prepares to strap it to your chest to draw out the illness. In the Middle Ages, toad therapy was a bizarre, disgusting custom, as foul as maggot cures or dung charms, rooted in a world that saw life in every gross remedy. You're clutching your cloak, the toad's croak unnerving, as you dive into the slimy world of amphibian healing, where wet skin is medicine and revulsion is the cost of hope. Mainstream history tells us that medieval medicine often used animals, like toads, for their supposed vital essence, with healers tying them to patients or grinding them into salves, believing their dampness could absorb disease or balance humors. You're staring at the toad, its warty bulk glistening in the healer's hands, its eyes bulging like the buboes we saw in that Black Death village. Historical records show such remedies, popular among peasants, were based on folklore and humoral theory, though they often spread infection or did nothing but disgust. You're wincing. The shirt stinks still fresh. And you're wondering if this croaking cure is a step too far in a town of filthy fixes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a toad caught at midnight under an oak carried moon magic, making its slime a sacred antidote to fevers or curses. You're catching the healer's mutter about the toad's lunar capture. Her tone as earnest as old Meg's Duncross boasts or the barber's blessed blade. Historians still argue whether this was mysticism or a way to elevate a gross practice. But you're betting it's a story to make the slime bearable, like the holy sweatshirt's divine spin. You're tensing as she binds the toad to your chest, its cold weight squirming, and you're praying the moon's magic outweighs the muck. The hut's a stage for this slimy ritual. You're feeling the toad's damp pulse against your skin, its legs twitching as the healer ties it with a rag, her hum echoing the chants from the corpse trial's pyre. You're smelling its earthy reek, a mix of pond mud and rot that rivals the public latrine's stench, and you're gagging. The sweatshirt's odor now a fond memory. You're thinking of the market's fly-covered meat, where filth was routine. Here, it's the toad. And you're realizing this cure's as risky as relic kisses or bloodletting's blade, carrying whatever lurks in its warts. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred death. Here, it's breeding desperation. And you're trying not to squirm. The church, as usual, offers no clarity. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering over strange cures, as if a toad's less holy than a saint's bone, though you're betting monks tried this, too. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might scoff at peasant toads, their fevers soothed with spiced wine, but you're stuck with this wriggling remedy. The healer's not as tight as her faith in it. You're hearing her tales of toad miracles, fevers cooled, pains eased, but you're skeptical. Recalling the urine bruise lies and the dung charms stink. You're adjusting to the toad's weight, its slime seeping through your tunic, and you're wondering if health's worth this crawling horror that customs a town oddity. You're noticing other patients, a weaver with a limp, a girl with a rash waiting for their own toads, their faces set like you slurping trencher slop or squatting at the latrine. You're hearing whispers of toad cures for warts, coughs, even bad luck, and you're shuddering. The healer's basket of amphibians, a testament to the town's endless ailments. You're trying a trick she suggests, stroking the toad to calm its spirit. But it's as useless as the sweatshirts. Deep breaths, and you're grimacing. The creatures croak a grim lullaby. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim stews, germy relics, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of defiance, though. You're catching your spouse's glance. From the door, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the barber's wrenching pull. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to bear this toad for him. Fever or no fever, you're thanking the healer, her smile crooked but warm, and you're stumbling out, the toad's slime clinging, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's as foul as the sickness. As you step into the street, the toad's damp lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks cures in slime. You're carrying a mix of disgust and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one croak at a time. The market's stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your chest begs to differ. You're stumbling through the town's muddy lanes, the spring dusk heavy with the stench of chamber pot splashes and market rot. The slimy weight of the healer's toad still pressed against your chest. It's croaking a grim echo of the sweat-soaked shirt, urine potions, and rancid trenchers you've endured. Your fever's fading, but the town's chaos calls you to the square, where a roaring crowd surrounds a gallows. cheering as a thief's neck snaps in a gruesome spectacle. In the Middle Ages, public executions were a disgusting custom, a bloody festival where death was entertainment, as foul as maggot cures or public latrines. You're clutching your basket, the crowd's fervor unsettling, as you dive into the gory world of execution shows, where justice is a public slaughter and revulsion mixes with thrill. Mainstream history tells us that public executions, hangings, beheadings, quarterings were common medieval entertainment, drawing crowds to witness justice for crimes from theft to treason, while spreading disease through packed, unwashed mobs. You're jostled by tanners, weavers, and kids, their shouts drowning out the thief's final plea as his body swings, the rope creaking above a muddy pit. Historical records show these events, often held in town squares, were both punishment and propaganda, reinforcing order but risking infection. Like the relic kisses we gagged at, you're wincing, the toad slime cold against your skin, and you're wondering how a town that cheers death stomachs its own filth. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed touching an executed man's hand could cure ailments, as if death's grip held healing power, a superstition akin to the toad's lunar magic or the dung cross's luck. You're watching a woman elbow forward, her hand grazing the thief's dangling fingers, and you're shuddering, recalling old Meg's holy stew bone and the latrine's moonlit purge. Historians still argue whether this was faith or morbid desperation, but you're betting it's a mix. In a town where chamber pot tosses and market stinks make death just another spectacle, you're keeping your distance, the crowd sweat thick, and you're praying her touch doesn't bring more than a cure. The square's a bloody carnival. You're smelling the mob's unwashed reek, sharper than the hovel's sewer stew, as vendors hawk pies amid the gore, their crusts as dubious as the market's rancid pork. You're seeing bodies pressed close, like the latrine's crowded bench, their coughs and cheers a germy haze that rivals the relic's spit-soaked sheen. You're thinking of the corpse trial's rotting stage, where death was judged. Here, it's celebrated, and you're realizing this spectacle's as risky as bloodletting's blade, spreading whatever festers in the crowd. You're recalling that Black Death village, where mobs bred plague. Here, they breed frenzy, and you're trying not to get swept up. The church stokes the fire. You're hearing a priest bless the gallows, his voice echoing those sin-obsessed sermons, as if death cleanses the town's soul, not its streets. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, watch from high balconies, their justice clean and distant, while you're stuck in the muck, the thief's blood splattering nearby. You're catching whispers of execution relics, rope scraps, sold for luck, but you're skeptical, recalling the urine-bruised lies and the sweatshirt's rank hope. You're watching the body cut down, the crowd surging for a closer look, and you're bracing for the next roar, the air thick with death's thrill. The ritual's a shared fever. You're noticing others cheer, some for justice, some for sport, like you slurping trencher slop or squatting at the latrine, a town bound by its grim rites. You're hearing cries for more at pickpockets turn necks, and you're shuddering. The gallows creak, a grim echo of the barber's wrenching pull. You're trying a trick a neighbor suggests, clapping to join the spirit, but it's as hollow as the toad's stroke, and you're edging back, the crowd's heat to close. You're thinking of the street's pot chaos, the hovels, lice, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like chewing rancid meat. There's a flicker of unease, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the crowd's edge, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of clarity. You're here for Jack, not this bloodlust. You're thinking of his chatter, a spark against this gore, and you're vowing to shield him from the gallows lore. You're slipping away, the crowd's cheers fading, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where death's a show, and life's the costlier fight. As you leave the square, the gallows stench lingers, a reminder of a town that revels in its own brutality. You're carrying a mix of horror and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one cheer at a time. The hovel's quiet calls, but you're tougher now, even if your heart begs to differ. You're slipping away from the raucous square, the gallows' grim cheers and the thief's swaying body fading behind you. Though the stench of blood and unwashed mob lingers, mixing with the town's familiar reek of chamber pots splashes and market rot, the spring night's chill bites as you pass the river, its murky flow a grim reminder of the public latrine's stench and the toad's slimy cure, still strapped to your chest. Now, you're pausing at the riverbank, where a crowd gathers, jeering as a woman, accused of witchcraft, is bound and tossed into the water, a brutal test to prove her guilt or innocence. In the Middle Ages, witch tests by drowning were a cruel, disgusting custom, as foul as execution spectacles or urine potions, steeped in fear and filth. You're clutching your basket, the woman's screams piercing, as you dive into the grim world of witch trials, where justice is a soggy grave and revulsion fuels the mob. Mainstream history tells us that medieval witch tests, particularly trial by water, were used to judge suspected witches, with the belief that pure water would reject the guilty, letting them float, while the innocent sank often to their death. You're watching the woman thrash, her bound hands splashing in the river's scum, the crowd's shouts drowning her pleas as the priest declares her fate. Historical records show these tests, common in rural areas, were less about evidence and more about fear, spreading disease through filthy rivers and mob frenzy, like the corpse trial's germy chaos. You're gripping your cloak, the toads croak faint, and you're wondering how a town that stomachs rancid pork calls this justice. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a witch's devil mark would glow underwater, proving guilt even if she sank, a superstition as wild as the toad's lunar magic or the gallows' healing touch. You're catching the priest's mutter about spotting such a mark, his eyes scanning the woman's flailing form, and you're shuddering, recalling old Meg's holy dung cross and the sweatshirt's divine spin. Historians still argue whether this was religious zeal or a way to rig trials, but you're betting it's a mob's excuse, like the plague village's scapegoating. You're staying back, the rivers stink sharp, and you're praying she sinks or floats, anything to end this horror. The riverbank's a cruel stage. You're surrounded by townsfolk, bakers, tanners, kids, their faces twisted with glee or fear, their breath sour like the market's sweaty haze. You're smelling the river, a stew of waste from the latrine's overflow and the town's leavings, worse than the hovel's trencher slop or the healer's maggot jar. You're realizing this tests as germy as relic kisses, the water carrying whatever festers in the crowd's coughs or the woman's thrashing wounds. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding judgment, and you're trying not to look as she gasps, sinking briefly before bobbing up. The church fuels the madness. You're hearing the priest invoke God's will, his voice echoing those sin-obsessed sermons, as if water's purer than the woman's soul. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might condemn witches from afar, but you're stuck in this peasant mob, where fear of magic blamed for fevers or bad crops turns neighbors into executioners. You're catching whispers of witch signs, strange births, sour milk, and you're skeptical, recalling the urine brew's lies and the execution's bloody farce. You're watching her float, the crowd roaring guilty, and you're bracing for the gallows' necks, the river's scum a grim omen, the rituals a shared sickness. You're noticing others jeer, some for justice, some for sport, like you chewing grim stew or squatting at the latrine. A town bound by its brutal rights. You're hearing cries to burn her, the mob's frenzy, a grim echo of the gallows cheers. And you're shuddering, the woman's soaked form a mirror of your own soaked shirt. You're trying a trick a neighbor suggests, praying for her soul to ease the test, but it's as hollow as the toad's stroke. And you're edging back, the crowd's heat to close. You're thinking of the street's pot chaos, the hovel's lice, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like surviving the barber's blade. There's a flicker of pity, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the crowd's edge, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care. And it's a moment of clarity. You're here for Jack, not this cruelty. You're thinking of his chatter, a spark against this mob's roar. And you're vowing to shield him from the river's lies. You're slipping away, the woman's fate sealed as they drag her out, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where justice drowns in filth, and mercy's the real victim. As you leave the riverbank, the water's stench lingers, a reminder of a town that judges with cruelty. You're carrying a mix of horror and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one dunk at a time. The hovel's quiet calls, but you're tougher now, even if your heart begs to differ. You're trudging back to your hovel through the town's twilight lanes, the spring air heavy with the river's rancid stench from the witch's drowning test. Its muddy tang mingling with the familiar reek of chamber pot splashes and the fading croak of the toad still strapped to your chest. The mob's cruel cheers echo in your ears, joining the gallows roars, the relic's germy kiss, and the barber surgeon's bloody pull in a grim parade of medieval filth. Now, you're settling into your straw mattress, its crunch barely masking the scuttle of fleas and rats and wanted bedfellows. That makes sleep a battle as disgusting as urine potions or public latrines. In the Middle Ages, sharing beds with pests was a revolting custom, a nightly ordeal where vermin were as common as the muck in the streets. You're clutching a tattered blanket, the mattresses itch relentless, as you dive into the creepy world of flea-infested beds, where rest is a war and disgust is the only constant. Mainstream history tells us that medieval bedding, often straw, or wool stuffed into crude frames, was a haven for fleas, lice, and rats, thriving in unwashed linens and cramped hovels, spreading disease in a world blind to hygiene. You're scratching your leg, a flea's bite flaring, as a rat's shadow darts across the floor. Its squeak louder than the hovel's fire crackle. Historical records show that pests were so common, carrying typhus, plague, or bites that people accepted them as part of life, like the rancid pork or trencher slop we gagged at. You're swatting the air, your fever's faint hum lingering, and you're wondering how anyone sleeps in a town where the bed's a battlefield. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed fleas were God's spurs, sent to keep sinners awake for prayer, making their bites a holy nuisance rather than a curse. You're catching old Meg's voice from next door, muttering about her fleas as divine prods, and you're grimacing, recalling her Duncross boasts and the witch tests. Holy water. Historians still argue whether this was piety or a way to cope with infestations, but you're betting it's resignation, like the latrine's moonlit purge excuse. You're shaking out your blanket, a cloud of dust and fleas rising, and you're praying God's spurs skip you tonight. The hovel's a pest-ridden trap. You're lying beside your family, Jack's small form twitching as he scratches. The mattress is shared misery like the public latrine's bench or the trencher's germy slop. You're feeling fleas hop, their bites a fiery itch worse than the toad's slime, and you're spotting a rat gnawing a crust by the fire, unbothered by your glare. You're thinking of the market's sweaty crowds, where pests leaped like gossip. And you're realizing beds here are no sanctuary, just another link in the town's chain of filth. Like lice or street puddles. You're recalling that black, death village, where fleas brought death. Here, they're just sleeplessness. And you're trying not to bolt upright. The church, as ever, offers no aid. You're remembering those sermons, preaching spiritual purity over physical cleanliness, as if a clean soul repels fleas like a saint's bone. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might sleep on silk with fewer pests, but you're stuck with this straw. It's vermin as relentless as the healer's maggot jar. You're hearing Meg's tales of flea charms, sacks of lavender to lull them, but you're skeptical. Your own sprig long lost to the market's scams and urine's burn. You're smacking a flea, its tiny corpse a grim trophy, and you're wondering if rest's a luxury you'll never afford, the customs a nightly ritual. You're noticing everyone battles pest stanners, bakers, the priest all tossing in lousy beds. Their scratches a chorus like dodging pot splashes or chewing gritty stew. You're hearing whispers of flea traps, bowls of water under beds, but they're as useless as the trencher's etiquette. And you're swatting again. The rats scuttle mocking your efforts. You're trying a trick Meg suggests, burning sage to smoke them out. But the fumes just choke you, and the fleas dance on. You're thinking of the town's shared miseries, grim food, germy relics, witch dung sand. You're seeing this as another badge of grit, like surviving the gallows roar. There's a flicker of warmth, though. You're tucking Jack's blanket tighter, his sleepy murmur a spark against the itch, and it's a moment of endurance, like sharing the trencher's mess or your spouse's posy wearing care. You're catching her glance, her hand swatting a flea for you, and it's a quiet bond, like dodging the mob's frenzy. You're settling back, the mattresses crunch a grim lullaby, and you're vowing to sleep, pests or not, for Jack's sake. You're bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where beds are battlegrounds, and rest's a hard-won fight. As the fire dims, the flea's bites linger, a reminder of a town that sleeps in its own filth. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one scratch at a time. The hovel's dark, but the rats aren't, and you're tougher now, even if your skin begs to differ. You're tossing on your flea-infested mattress. The straws crunch and the rats scuttle from last night, still jangling your nerves. As the spring dawn filters through the hovel's cracks, carrying the town's familiar stench of chamber pot splashes and market muck. The bites on your skin burn, a grim reminder of the witch test's river scum, the gallows' bloody roar, and the toad's slimy cure. But now you're trudging to a noblewoman's house, summoned to deliver greens and, bizarrely, a jar of pigeon droppings she swears will brighten her skin. In the Middle Ages, using bird waste as a beauty hack was a disgusting custom, as foul as public latrines or rancid stew, rooted in a world where filth doubled as finesse. You're clutching your basket, her servants smirk unnerving, as you dive into the revolting world of pigeon-dropping facials, where beauty's a smear of grime and disgust is the price of glow. Mainstream history tells us that medieval beauty regimens, especially among the wealthy, often used animal byproducts like pigeon droppings, believed to soften skin or erase blemishes, despite their obvious hygiene risks. You're standing in the noblewoman's chamber, its tapestries a stark contrast to your hovel's straw. As she dips a finger into the jar, it's chalky, ammonia stench hitting like the latrine's river reek. Historical records show such concoctions mixed with vinegar or rose water were prized by ladies chasing a pale, noble complexion, though they likely spread infections or irritated skin. You're gagging, the fever's faint hum lingering, And you're wondering how vanity thrives in a town that bathes in rot. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed pigeon droppings, gathered from church spires, carried holy virtue, making their stink a divine path to beauty, like the sacred toad or relic's sweaty kiss. You're catching the noblewoman's boast about her jar's cathedral source, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's lice as spurs and the witch tests holy water. Historians still argue whether this was piety or a marketing ploy for foul remedies, but you're betting it's a noble's excuse to justify slathering waste. Like the dung cross's luck, you're holding the jar, its gritty texture vile, and you're praying her glow doesn't come with a rash. The chamber's a stage for this grim ritual. You're watching her smear the paste, its grayish streaks glistening on her cheeks. The smell sharp enough to rival the hovel's trencher slop or the barber's bloody tools. You're noticing her servant mix in rose water, a nod to the market's perfume scams. But it barely dulls the ammonia, and you're fighting a gag. The toads. Slime now a fond memory. You're thinking of the market's fly-covered meat, where filth was routine. Here, it's luxury. And you're realizing beauty's as germy as the public latrine's bench, carrying whatever lurks in pigeon leavings. You're recalling that Black Death Village, where filth bred plague. Here, its breeding status. And you're trying not to stare. The church, as usual, stays mum. You're remembering those sermons, preaching vanity as sin but ignoring noble women's quirks. As if a clean soul trumps a dirty face. Peasants, like you, scrub with river water if at all, while nobles, in their gilded bedchambers, cake on this mess, their wealth shielding them from scorn. You're hearing the noblewoman's tales of dropping miracles, wrinkles smoothed, scars faded, but you're skeptical, recalling the urine bruise lies and the sweatshirt's rank hope. You're standing back, the paste's fumes stinging, and you're wondering if beauty's worth this fecal farce. The custom's a noble oddity. You're noticing her maids, their faces plain but spared the paste, giggling as they prep more jars, their hands as stained as the tanners from the latrine. You're hearing whispers of other hackspat blood for lips, lead for pallor, and you're shuddering. The noblewoman's vanity a testament to the town's split. Filth for the poor, finesse for the rich. You're trying a trick her servant suggests, breathing through your mouth to ease the smell. But it's as useless as the flea trap's bowl. And you're coughing, the air thick with waste. You're thinking of the town's shared battles lice, grim stews, which dunks, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of pity, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the door, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care. And it's a moment of clarity. You're here for Jack, not this noble's glow. You're thinking of his chatter, a spark against this vanity's stink, and you're vowing to keep him from chasing beauty in bird muck. You're handing over the greens, her coin heavy, and you're slipping out, the pastes reek clinging, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where even beauty's a filthy fight. As you step into the street, the dropping stench lingers, a reminder of a town that paints grace with grime. You're carrying a mix of disgust and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One smear at a time. The hovel's quiet calls, but you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're trudging back to your hovel through the town's twilight lanes, the spring air thick with the stench of chamber pots, splashes, and market rot. The noblewoman's pigeon-dropping paste still haunting your nose alongside the toad's slimy croak, the witch tests river scum, and the gallows' bloody cheers. The hovel's smoky warmth offers little comfort as you settle by the fire. But now you're drawn to a pilgrimage tale old Meg spins, her voice low as she describes kissing a saint's preserved corpse. its rotting stench revered as a holy cure. In the Middle Ages, venerating decomposing relics was a disgusting custom, as grim as public latrines or rancid pork, where decay was divine and revulsion was a path to grace. You're clutching your blanket, Meg's tale chilling, as you dive into the foul world of saintly corpses, where the smell of rot is a prayer and filth is a miracle. Mainstream history tells us that medieval Christians prized relics, including preserved bodies of saints, believed to channel divine healing, with pilgrims flocking to shrines to touch or kiss them, despite the rot and disease they spread. You're picturing a cathedral crypt where a saint's corpse, waxy, shriveled, reeking, lies in a gilded case, its odor drawing devotees like the relic kiss we endured. Historical records show these shrines, like St. Thomas Becket's at Canterbury, were germ magnets, with decay's stench seen as proof of holiness, not hazard. You're scratching a flea bite, the hovel's straw itching, and you're wondering how faith turns rot into redemption in a town that bathes in muck. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a saint's holy stench could cure ailments if inhaled deeply, as if decay's fumes were God's breath. A notion as wild as pigeon droppings glow or the toad's lunar cure. You're catching Meg's nod as she swears sniffing a corpse's shroud eased her cough. And you're gagging, recalling her lice pride and the latrine's moonlit purge. Historians still argue whether this was devotion or a way to sanctify disgust, but you're betting it's both. In a town where sewer stew and bloodlettings blade are routine, you're wrapping your blanket tighter, the fire's glow frail, and you're praying Meg's pilgrimage stays a tale, not your fate. The hovel's a grim stage for her story. You're listening to Meg describe the corpse's blackened skin, its odor a mix of mold and death that outstrips the market's rancid meat or the witch test's river. You're imagining pilgrims pressing lips to the shroud, their breath mingling like the public latrine's shared bench, and you're shuddering. The relic kisses germy sheen now quaint. You're thinking of the gallows mob, where death was sport. Here, it's worship. And you're realizing this ritual's as risky as the sweatshirt's rank embrace, carrying whatever festers in decay. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding miracles. And you're trying not to retch. The church fuels the fervor. You're remembering those sermons, preaching relics as God's grace, not rot, as a risk, as if a saint's stench trumps the street's midden heaps. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might pray to private relics, but you're stuck with Meg's tale. Her pilgrimage, a peasant's gamble where the prize is a whiff of death. You're hearing her boast of corpse miracles, fevers lifted, pains eased, but you're skeptical, recalling the urine bruise lies and the execution's false cures. You're shifting on the straw, a rat scuttle nearby, and you're wondering if holiness is worth this rotting price. The customs of pilgrims right. You're noticing neighbors nod, their own tales of shrines, bones, shrouds, holy stinks echoing Meg's, like you slurping trencher slop or squatting at the latrine, a town bound by its grim faith. You're hearing whispers of corpse dust sprinkled on wounds, and you're shuddering. Meg's story a testament to the town's hunger for miracles. You're trying a trick she suggests, picturing the saint's face to sweeten the stench. But it's as useless as the flea trap's bowl. And you're coughing, the hovel's smoke thick. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, witch dunks, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of awe, though. You're catching your spouse's glance across the fire, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the barber's wrenching pull. You're thinking of Jack, asleep on the straw, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to keep him from sniffing corpses. Even if you admire Meg's stubborn faith, you're thanking her, her grin crooked but warm, and you're settling back, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where death's decay is a prayer, and life's the harder fight. As the fire dims, the corpse's stench lingers in Meg's tale, a reminder of a town that seeks grace and rot. You're carrying a mix of disgust and resolve, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One whiff at a time. The hovel's dark, but your grit's not, and you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're curled up in your hovel's dim corner, the fire's faint crackle barely warming the straw-strewn floor. As old Meg's tale of the saint's rotting corpse lingers, its holy stench joining the town's ever-present reek of chamber pot splashes, flea bites, and the witch tests river scum. The spring night's chill seeps through the walls, but now you're trudging to a nearby spring, drawn by whispers of a miracle mud said to heal your lingering fever with its sacred filth. In the Middle Ages, soaking in muddy springs was a disgusting custom, as grim as pigeon-dropping facials or public latrines. Where grime was a path to salvation, you're clutching your tattered cloak, the spring's earthy tang rising, as you dive into the foul world of mud baths, where filth is divine and revulsion is the price of a cure. Mainstream history tells us that medieval pilgrims sought healing in holy springs, often muddy and tainted, believing their mineral-rich sludge, blessed by saints or ancient rites, could cure ailments from fevers to lameness. You're wading into the spring, its brown water swirling with dirt and algae, the stench a mix of wet earth and decay that rivals the hovel's trencher slop. Historical records show these springs, like Bath's Roman remnants, drew crowds who, soaked in communal muck, spreading infections in a world blind to germs. Much like the relic kisses we endured, you're sinking into the slime, the fever's hum pulsing, and you're wondering how faith makes filth feel like hope in a town of rancid pork and lice. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a spring's mud gained power if stirred by a priest's staff, its filth anointed like the saint's corpse stench or the witch tests holy water. You're catching a pilgrim's mutter about a monk's blessing on this spring, his staff long gone but the mud's grace enduring, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holy lice and the toad's lunar cure. Historians still argue whether this was devotion or a way to sanctify dirt, but you're betting it's a pilgrim's excuse, like the dung cross's luck. In a town where midden heaps are home, you're scooping mud, its cold grit oozing, and you're praying the monk's staff knew something you don't. The spring's a murky shrine. You're shoulder to shoulder with pilgrims, tanners, weavers, a coughing beggar, their bodies half submerged, their murmurs a chant like the gallows mob frenzy. You're smelling the mud, sharp with rot and sulfur, worse than the public latrine's river or the barber's bloody tools, and you're gagging, the sweatshirt's rank embrace now quaint. You're realizing this bath's as germy as the corpse trial's pyre, the water teeming with whatever festers in the crowd's sores or coughs. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding miracles, and you're trying not to swallow the sludge. The church stokes the hope. You're hearing a cleric's prayer from the bank, his voice echoing those sin-obsessed sermons, as if mud's purer than your soul. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might visit grander springs, their baths scented, but you're stuck in this peasant muck, the spring's slime as communal as the latrine's bench. You're catching whispers of mud miracles, fevers cooled, joints eased, but you're skeptical, recalling the urine bruise lies and the pigeon paste's vain glow. You're smearing mud on your arms, its weight heavy as the toad's, and you're wondering if healing's worth this filthy plunge. The custom's a pilgrim's rite. You're noticing others slather mud, some on faces, some on wounds like You slurping trencher slop or squatting at the latrine, a town bound by its grim quests. You're hearing tales of mud cures for blindness, curses, even love sickness, and you're shuddering. The springs churn a testament to the town's endless ailments. You're trying a trick the pilgrim suggests, chanting psalms to charge the mud, but it's as hollow as the flea trap's bowl, and you're sinking deeper. The slimes grip tight. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, witch dunks, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of resolve, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the bank, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the gallows' bloody thrill. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to rise from this mud for him. Fever or no fever, you're thanking the cleric, his smile distant, and you're climbing out. The sludge dripping, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's a dive into dirt, and hope's the only clean thing left. As you trudge home, the mud stench lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks grace in grime. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one slather at a time. The hovel's dark calls, but you're tougher now, even if your skin begs to differ. You're trudging back to your hovel, the spring mud from the miracle spring still caking your skin. Its earthy reek blending with the town's relentless stench of chamber pot splashes and market rot. The memory of pigeon-dropping facials, witch drownings, and flea-ridden beds itching at your mind. The hovel's smoky warmth is a faint refuge, but now you're wincing as a stray dog, its tongue lolling, licks a festering scrape on your leg. A remedy old Meg swears will heal it faster than the healer's toad or urine brew. In the Middle Ages, dog licks were a disgusting medical custom, as grim as mud baths or rancid stew. Rooted in a world where animal spit was a cure and filth was a fact of life. You're clutching your basket, the dog's slobber worm, as you dive into the revolting world of canine healing, where a mutt's tongue is medicine and disgust is the price of recovery. Mainstream history tells us that medieval medicine often turned to animals, with dog saliva believed to cleanse wounds or cure infections, based on folklore that dogs' tongues held purifying powers, despite the obvious risk of disease. You're shoving the dog away, its breath sour as the public latrine's river. But Meg's insistence echoes, claiming its lick will suck out the poison. Historical records show this practice, common among peasants, was less about science and more about desperation, spreading infections like the germy relic kisses, or public latrine benches we endured. You're wiping your leg, the scrape stinging, and you're wondering how a town that gags at sewer stew trusts a stray slobber. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a dog that licked a saint's shrine had holy saliva, making its tongue a divine tool, like the mud spring's anointed sludge or the corpse's sacred stench. You're catching Meg's nod as she swears this mutt once lapped at St. Cuthbert's altar, and you're grimacing, recalling her holy lice, and the gallows' morbid touch. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a way to elevate strays, but you're betting it's a peasant's hope, like the dung cross's luck. In a town where midden heaps are neighbors, you're shoeing the dog, its whine pitiful, and you're praying its spit doesn't bring more than a miracle. The hovel's a stage for this grim cure. You're sitting by the fire, the dog circling, its tongue darting back to your scrape, and you're gagging, the wet warmth worse than the sweatshirt's rank cling or the trencher's greasy slop. You're smelling its breath, a mix of carrion and mud, sharper than the barber's bloody tools. And you're realizing this remedy's as germy as the witch tests river, carrying whatever festers in the dog's maw. You're thinking of the market's fly-covered meat, where filth was routine. Here, it's medicine, and you're trying not to retch as Meg urges another lick. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding faith, and you're fighting the urge to run. The church, as ever, stays vague. You're remembering those sermons, preaching suffering over strange cures, as if a dog's lick is less holy than a saint's bone, though your betting monks tried it, too. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might scoff at peasant mutts, their wounds dressed with herbs, but you're stuck with this stray. It's saliva as personal as the healer's maggot jar. You're hearing Meg's tales of lick miracles, wounds healed, fevers cooled, but you're skeptical. Recalling the mud bath's lies and the pigeon paste's vain glow. You're pushing the dog back, its slobber drying, and you're wondering if healing's worth this canine kiss. The custom's a town oddity. You're noticing neighbors call their own dogs a tanner with a mangy cur, a weaver with a yapping pup for similar cures. Their faces set like you slurping trencher, SLOP, or squatting at the latrine. You're hearing whispers of dog licks for sores, burns, even curses, and you're shuddering. The hovel's floor a testament to the town's endless strays and ailments. You're trying a trick Meg suggests, offering the dog bread to sweeten. It's spit, but it's as useless as the flea trap's bowl, and you're grimacing. The mutt's tongue relentless. You're thinking of the town's shared battle's lice, grim food, which tests, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of warmth, though. You're catching your spouse's glance across the fire, her not a quiet strength like her posy-wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the gallows' bloody thrill. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to bear this lick for him. Scrape or no scrape, you're shooing the dog, its tail wagging, and you're settling back, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where healing's a slobber, and hope's the only clean thing left. As the fire dims, the dog's breath lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks cures in filth. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One lick at a time, the hovel's dark calls, but you're tougher now, even if your leg begs to differ. You're hunched by the hovel's dying fire, the spring night's chill creeping through the walls as the stray dog's slobbery lick on your scrape still stings, its carrion breath mingling with the town's relentless reek of chamber pot splashes, market rot, and the mud spring's sulphurous sludge. The fever's finally eased, but the memory of dog spit, witch drownings, and saintly corpses keeps you restless on your flea-ridden straw. Now, you're visiting a bathhouse, lured by tales of a communal soak that promises to wash away your grime, only to find a steaming tub of shared filth. In the Middle Ages, communal bathhouses were a disgusting custom, as foul as dog-lick cures or trencher slop, where cleanliness drowned in strangers' dirt. You're clutching your tattered cloak, the bathhouse's humid stink rising, as you dive into the grimy world of shared tubs, where soap's a myth and revulsion's the price of a soak. Mainstream history tells us that medieval bathhouses, while offering rare chances to bathe, were often communal and unclean, with dozens sharing the same water, spreading germs in a world that saw bathing as a social, not hygienic, act. You're stepping into the bathhouse, a dim hall where a massive wooden tub steams, its surface slick with scum and floating hair, packed with tanners, merchants, and a coughing weaver. Historical records show these tubs, reused without draining, were breeding grounds for infections, much like the public latrine's river or the relic's germy kiss. You're hesitating, the water's murk as grim as the hovel's midden heap. And you're wondering how a town that gags at rancid pork calls this clean. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed bathhouse water, blessed by a sprinkled herb, like rosemary, could purge sins as well as dirt, making the filthy soak a holy rite. Like the mud spring's anointed sludge or the dog's holy spit. You're catching a bathkeeper's claim that her rosemary sprig tossed in this morning sanctifies the tub. And you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holy lice and the pigeon paste's cathedral boast. Historians still argue whether this was devotion or a way to lure bathers, but you're betting it's a ploy. Like the trencher's blessed crust, in a town where filth's a fact of life, you're easing into the tub, the water's warmth tempting but vile, and you're praying the rosemary's magic outweighs the scum. The bathhouse is a steamy cesspool. You're shoulder to shoulder with strangers, their sweat and grime swirling into the water. The stench a mix of body odor and mold that rivals the public latrine's river, or the corpse trial's pyre. You're feeling the tub's slick bottom, littered with grit and worse, and you're gagging, the dog's lick now a fond memory. You're realizing this soaks as germy as the gallows mob, the water teeming with whatever festers in the weaver's cough or the tanner's sores. You're recalling that Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding false hope, and you're trying not to swallow the broth you're stewing in. The church, as usual, wavers. You're remembering those sermons, preaching modesty but tolerating bathhouses as communal good, as if shared scum's holier than a saint's bone. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, might bathe in private tubs with scented oils, but you're stuck in this peasant soup, the bathkeeper's rosemary a cruel jest. You're hearing her tales of bath miracles, fevers lifted, skins cleared, but you're skeptical, recalling the mud bath's lies and the sweatshirts. Rank promise. You're scrubbing with a rag, the water's film sticking, and you're wondering if cleanliness is a noble's dream, not yours. The custom's a town staple. You're noticing others soak bakers, kids, a coughing beggar all dunking in the same tub. Their splash is a chorus like squatting at the latrine or slurping trencher slop. You're hearing whispers of bathhouse cures rheumatism eased, curses broken, and you're shuddering. The tub's murk a testament to the town's endless ailments. You're trying a trick the bathkeeper suggests, dunking your head to cleanse the soul, but it's as useless as the flea trap's bowl, and you're coughing. The water's taste too close to the rivers. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, which tests, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of resilience, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the tub's edge, her nada, quiet strength like her posy wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the barber's wrenching pull. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to rise from this filth for him. Clean or not, you're thanking the bathkeeper, her smile sly, and you're climbing out, the scum clinging, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where bathing's a dive into dirt, and hope's the only clear thing left. As you step outside, the tub's reek lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks clean in grime. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one soak at a time. The hovel's dark calls, but you're tougher now, even if your skin begs to differ. You're trudging back to your hovel, the spring night's damp chill seeping through your cloak, the bathhouse's scummy residue still clinging to your skin. Its moldy reek a grim companion to the town's familiar stench of chamber pots splashes, market rot, and the dog licks carrion tang. The hovel's smoky fire offers little solace, but now you're wincing as you don a hair shirt, a coarse garment of goat hair lent by old Meg. Who swears its itch will please God and cure your lingering aches? In the Middle Ages, wearing hair shirts for penance was a disgusting custom, as prickly as flea-ridden beds or mud baths, where suffering was devotion and filth was a path to grace. You're clutching your tattered blanket, the shirt's scratch relentless, as you dive into the itchy world of penitential garments, where piety's a torment and revulsion's the price of salvation. Mainstream history tells us that hair shirts, woven from rough animal hair or hemp, were worn by medieval Christians, monks, nobles, and devout peasants to mortify the flesh, seeking forgiveness or divine favor through discomfort, often harboring lice and infections. You're shifting under the shirt, its coarse fibers jabbing your skin like 1,000 fleas, the itch sharper than the public latrine's splinters or the toad's slimy weight. Historical records show these garments, popular among the pious, were rarely washed, becoming breeding grounds for pests and sores. Much like the bathhouse's germy tub, you're scratching, the fever's faint hum gone but aches persisting, and you're wondering how a town that gags at rancid pork calls this holy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed a hair shirt worn during a saint's feast day absorbed divine grace, making its itch a sacred trial, like the bathhouse's blessed rosemary or the dog's holy lick. You're catching Meg's whisper about the shirt's use on St. Cuthbert's Day, her eyes gleaming like when she praised the corpse's stench. Historians still argue whether this was devotion or a way to justify torture, but you're betting it's a monk's trick, like the witch test's glowing mark. In a town where midden heaps are neighbors, you're tugging the shirt, its bristles biting, and you're praying Cuthbert's grace outweighs the lice you're sure it's hiding. The hovel's a stage for this prickly penance. You're pacing by the fire, the shirt's scratch a constant jam, its musty smell sweat and go traveling the trencher's greasy slop or the mud spring's sulphurous churn. You're feeling tiny crawlers, likely lice, joining the itch, and you're shuddering. The sweatshirt's rank cling now quaint. You're realizing this shirt's as germy as the relic kisses spit, harboring whatever festers in its fibers, like the fleas in your straw bed. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding piety, and you're trying not to tear the shirt off in a fit of despair. The church drives the suffering. You're remembering those sermons, preaching pain as God's will, not comfort as his gift, as if an itchy shirt's holier than a saint's bone. Nobles, like those in gilded bed chambers, might wear silk under their hair shirts, cheating the torment, but you're stuck with this peasant. Scourge, its bristles as personal as the barber's bloody blade. You're hearing Meg's tales of penance miracles, sins forgiven, fevers lifted, but you're skeptical, recalling the mud bath's lies and the pigeon paste's vain glow. You're rubbing your arms, the itch of fire, and you're wondering if salvation's worth this crawling agony, the custom's a devout oddity. You're noticing neighbors don similar shirts, monks, weavers, a devout baker, all scratching under coarse weaves, their grimaces a chorus like squatting at the latrine or slurping rancid stew. You're hearing whispers of hair shirts for vows, illnesses, even lost love, and you're shuddering. Meg's borrowed shirt a testament to the town's endless sins and sores. You're trying a trick she suggests, praying to sweeten the itch, but it's as useless as the bathhouse's dunk, and you're grimacing, the bristles relentless. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, which tests, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of resolve, though. You're catching your spouse's glance across the fire, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the gallows' bloody thrill. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to bear this shirt for him. Aches or no aches, You're thanking Meg, her grin crooked but kind, and you're settling onto the straw, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where piety's a scratch, and hope's the only balm as the fire dims. The shirt's itch lingers, a reminder of a town that seeks grace in torment. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness. One bristle at a time, the hovel's dark calls, but you're tougher now, even if your skin begs to differ. You're tossing on your hovel's straw mattress, the hair shirt's relentless itch from last night clawing at your skin. Its coarse bristles a grim companion to the town's ever-present reek of chamber pot splashes, market rot, and the bathhouse's scummy residue. The spring dawn's faint light creeps through the cracks, but the sting of flea bites and the memory of dog licks, mud baths, and witch drownings keep you restless. Now, you're visiting a perfumer's stall in the market, lured by a noble's fad, dabbing water scented with rotten eggs, believed to mask the body's stench with a sulphurous elegance. In the Middle Ages, rotten egg perfume was a disgusting custom, as foul as hair shirts or public latrines, where nobility chased grace in grime. You're clutching your basket, the perfumer's grin sly, as you dive into the reeking world of sulphur scents, where beauty's a whiff of decay and revulsion's the price of style. Mainstream history tells us that medieval nobles, seeking to outshine the unwashed masses, used perfumes made from pungent ingredients like sulfur or ammonia, often derived from rotten eggs or urine, to signal wealth despite their dubious odor. You're standing at the stall, a clay vial of yellowish liquid glinting, its sharp, eggy stench hitting like the public latrine's river or the mud spring's sulphurous churn. Historical records show these scents, mixed with herbs to soften the bite, were prized by the elite, though they irritated skin and noses, much like the pigeon-dropping facials we gagged at. You're coughing, the fever gone but the air biting, and you're wondering how a town that chokes on rancid pork calls this chic. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed sulfur scents, especially from eggs blessed by a priest, could ward off evil spirits, making their stink a holy shield. Like the hair shirt's divine itch or the dog's sacred lick, you're catching the perfumer's boast about a cleric's prayer over his brew, and you're grimacing, recalling old Meg's holy trencher crust and the bathhouse's rosemary ploy. Historians still argue whether this was piety or a noble's marketing trick, but you're betting it's a status flex, like the dung cross's luck. In a town where midden heaps are routine, you're sniffing the vial, its sulfur punch searing, and you're praying its grace doesn't come with a rash. The market's a stage for this grim fad. You're watching a noblewoman dab the scent behind her ears, her silk veil no match for the eggy cloud that trails her, sharper than the hovel's trencher slop or the gallows' bloody haze. You're noticing merchants and maids wince, their own sweat honest, like the market's unwashed crowds preferable to this elegance. You're realizing this perfume's as germy as the relic kisses spit, carrying whatever festers in the perfumer's vats, like the fleas in your straw bed. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding fashion, and you're trying not to gag as the noblewoman passes. The church, as usual, wavers. You're remembering those sermons, preaching vanity as sin but tolerating noble whims, as if a sulphur scent's holier than a peasant's grime. Peasants, like you, make do with river water if at all, while nobles, in their gilded bedchambers, mask their funk with this reek, their wealth shielding them from scorn. You're hearing the perfumer's tales of scent miracles, lovers wooed, fevers dodged, but you're skeptical, recalling the mud bath's lies and the dog lick's false cure. You're holding the vial, its fumes stinging, and you're wondering if style's worth this rotten price. the customs a noble quirk. You're noticing other elites, lords, ladies, a smirking squire buying vials, their coins flashing as they dab sulfur on wrists, like you slurping trencher slop, or squatting at the latrine. A town split by its stinks. You're hearing whispers of scent fads, ambergris, musk, all pungent, and you're shuddering. The perfumer's stall, a testament to the town's hunger for distinction. You're trying a trick he suggests, mixing the scent with lavender to soften it, but it's as useless as the hair shirt's prayer. And you're coughing, the eggy whiff relentless. You're thinking of the town's shared battles, lice, grim food, which tests, and you're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of irony, though. You're catching your spouse's glance from the market's edge, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care. And it's a moment of clarity. You're here for Jack, not this noble's reek. You're thinking of his chatter, a spark against this vanity's stink, and you're vowing to keep him from chasing grace and rot. You're handing back the vial, the perfumer's frown sharp, and you're slipping away, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where beauty's a stench, and grit's the truest shine. As you leave the stall, the sulphur's reek lingers, a reminder of a town that cloaks filth in finery. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one whiff at a time. The hovel's dark calls, but you're tougher now, even if your nose begs to differ. You're weaving through the town's bustling market, the spring morning's warmth doing little to dull the stench of chamber pot splashes and market rot. The sulphurous whiff of that rotten egg perfume still stinging your nose alongside the hair shirt's itch, the dog lick's carrion breath, and the mud spring's sulphurous sludge. The market's hum of bartering and shouts is a chaotic pulse. But now you're pausing at a neighbor's hovel, where old Meg stirs a pot of broth, its steam carrying the faint tang of old bones scavenged from a butcher's refuse pile. In the Middle Ages, boiling scavenged bones for broth was a disgusting custom, as grim as communal bathhouses or witch tests. Born of scarcity in a world where every scrap was survival. You're clutching your basket, Meg's proud grin unsettling, as you dive into the rank world of bone broth, where waste is supper and revulsion's the price of a meal. Mainstream history tells us that medieval peasants, facing constant hunger, scavenged bones, offal, and scraps from butchers or middens to make broth, stretching meager resources in a world where fresh meat was a noble's luxury. You're peering into Meg's pot, its grayish broth bubbling with knobby bones, their marrow long gone, but boiled for any trace of flavor. Historical records show this practice, common in lean times, used bones often weeks old, teeming with bacteria or flies, much like the rancid pork or trencher slop we gagged at. You're swallowing hard, the market's fly-covered stalls in mind, and you're wondering how a town that chokes on public latrines stench stomachs this brew. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed bones from a blessed animal, say a cow grazed on church land, could infuse broth with divine strength, making its rankness a holy gift, like the rotten egg perfume's sacred spin or the mud bath's anointed sludge. You're catching Meg's boast that her bones came from a priory's herd, and you're grimacing, recalling her holy trencher crust and the dog-lick's saintly claim. Historians still argue whether this was faith or a way to dignify scraps, but you're betting it's desperation, like the dung cross's luck. In a town where midden heaps are pantries, you're sniffing the broth, its oily tang searing, and you're praying the priory's cows weren't as rank as the river. The hovel's a grim kitchen. You're watching the pot bubble, bits of gristle and fat floating like the bathhouse's scummy film. The stench a mix of rot and earth that rivals the gallows' bloody haze, or the witch test's river scum. You're realizing this broths as germy as the relic kisses spit, brewed from bones that might have fed rats or flies. Like the fleas in your straw bed, you're thinking of the market's rancid pork, where filth was routine. Here, it's survival, and you're trying not to gag as Meg ladles a bowl, offering you a sip. You're recalling the Black Death village, where filth bred plague. Here, it's breeding supper, and you're fighting the urge to bolt. The church, as ever, stays silent. You're remembering those sermons, preaching fasting over flavor, as if a pure soul makes old bones safe, not a sin. Nobles, like those in gilded bedchambers, dine on fresh game, their broths clear and spiced, while you're stuck with this peasant slop, its bones as dubious as the barber's bloody blade. You're hearing Meg's tales of broth miracles, hunger sated, strength restored, but you're skeptical, recalling the sweatshirt's lies and the pigeon paste's vain glow. You're eyeing the bowl, its steam curling, and you're wondering if sustenance is worth this rancid price. The customs, a town staple. You're noticing neighbors boil their own scrap stanners with fish bones, weavers with chicken feet all stirring pots of murky brew, like you slurping trencher slop or squatting at the latrine. You're hearing whispers of broth trick sad, nettles, boiled twice but they're as useless as the hair shirt's prayer, and you're shuddering. Meg's pot a testament to the town's endless hunger. You're trying a trick she suggests, sipping slow to taste the strength, but it's like savoring the river's muck, and you're grimacing, the broth's grit coating your throat. You're thinking of the town's shared battle's lice, grim cures, which dunk sand. You're seeing this as another badge of grit, like dodging a pot splash. There's a flicker of warmth, though. You're catching your spouse's glance across the hovel, her not a quiet strength like her posy wearing care, and it's a moment of endurance, like surviving the gallows' bloody thrill. You're thinking of Jack, his chatter a spark, and you're vowing to sip this broth for him, hunger or no hunger. You're thanking Meg, her grin crooked but kind, and you're stepping out, bracing for the next revolting custom in a world where supper's a scavenged fight, and hope's the only flavor left. As you leave the hovel, the broth's tang lingers, a reminder of a town that cooks with its own decay. You're carrying a mix of disgust and defiance, ready to face more medieval nastiness, one sip at a time. The market's stench calls, but you're tougher now, even if your stomach begs to differ. You're standing in the hovel's doorway, the spring sun warming the town's muddy lanes as a rancid tang of old Meg's scavenged bone broth lingers on your tongue, joining the relentless stench of chamber pot splashes, market rot, and the hair shirt's itchy torment. The market's hum echoes, a pulse of life amidst the scars of dog licks, witch drownings, and communal bathhouse scum. And now you're reflecting on these disgusting customs lice, trenchers, saintly corpses, and how their gritty legacy shaped a cleaner future. The Middle Ages were a cauldron of filth, but their revolting habits sparked changes that ripple into your world, a testament to human endurance. You're clutching your basket, Jack's laughter ringing from the yard, as you weave the threads of this journey, disgust, defiance, hope into a legacy that outshines the town's grime, a beacon of survival in a world of muck. Mainstream history tells us that medieval customs, born of ignorance and necessity, laid the groundwork for modern hygiene, medicine, and social shifts, as the horrors of disease and filth like those we saw in the Black Death village pushed later generations toward sanitation, science, and reform. You're watching Jack chase a stray dog, his grin brighter than the market's rancid pork, and you're seeing the town's legacy in cleaner streets, soap, and laws that grew from its muddy roots. Historical records show that the Middle Ages Gross practices, maggot cures, public latrines, bone broths revealed the cost of filth. Inspiring plumbing, hospitals, and germ theory centuries later. You're breathing the spring air, still heavy with midden heaps, and you're marveling at how this town's grit echoes in today's world, where cleanliness is no longer a noble's dream. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval towns buried filth stones under new streets, believing they'd absorb old stinks and bless cleaner pots. A ritual akin to the mud spring's holy sludge or the dung cross's luck. You're picturing a stone beneath the square, its ghost guarding the town's transformation, much like Meg's tales of holy bones. Historians still argue whether these stones were superstition or early sanitation, but you're smiling, seeing their echo in modern sewers and soap, a nod to the town's gross past. You're nudging Jack to skip a pebble, his joy a spark, and you're feeling the weight of a legacy you'll pass on, cleaner but no less fierce. The town's heart beats through its filth. You're passing the tanner's wife, her hands now, brewing ale, not just tanning, a shift from the plague village's women who rose in crisis. The church, humbled since its germy relics and sin-soaked sermons, preaches softer now, its lessons tempered by the town's scars. The market thrives, its stalls less rancid, as traders learn from the broth's grim cost, a step toward fresher food. You're thinking of the wise woman's boiled water, a spark of science amid toad cures, and the barber's blade, a crude ancestor of sterile scalpels. The town's customs lice, trenchers, executions were a crucible, forging resilience that outlasts their stink, like Jack's laughter rising above the muck. The legacy is personal, too. You're watching your spouse barter greens, her posy gone but her care enduring, a strength that carried you through mud baths and dog licks, now shaping a hovel where Jack dreams beyond filth. You're teaching him to question to see the dung cross's folly. The relic's germy lie while honoring the grit that birthed cleaner wells and safer food. You're carrying the town's losses, Meg's tales, the tanner's toil, the witch's screams not as burdens but as roots, grounding a future where filth's a memory, not a meal. You're thinking of those noble bed chambers, where wealth dodged grime. Here, you built hope from muck, a richer triumph. The customs lessons endure. You're seeing fears cost the mob's witch frenzy, the church's blind faith but also defiance's power, the market's hustle, the women's rise, your spouse's unwavering care. You're recalling the latrine's shared bench, the gallows' grim stage, the hair shirt's prick, each a chapter in a story where grit won, not grime. You're sharing a nod with the tanner's wife, her ale a bond like the plague village's broth, and you're promising to guard this fragile progress, to keep the town whole. You're feeling the spring's warmth, a challenge met, and you're carrying a resolve to live fully. For those who scratched and slurped through the filth, in a world remade by their endurance, there's a spark of eternity, too. You're standing by the market, Jack's pebble skipping, and it's a moment that stretches beyond you, linking the town's muck to every soul who rises from grime. You're thinking of the trencher's slop, the execution's roar, the bathhouse's scum, and you're weaving them into a story that'll outlive you, like the stones and tales that carry the town's pain and pride. You're dropping the basket, the market alive with voices, and you're ready to live this legacy. Not just tell it. For Jack, for love, for a town that's more than its filth. Wind down now. Let the town soften, its muddy lanes and smoky hovels, fading into a gentle haze, like stars winking in a twilight sky. Picture yourself sinking into a warm, endless meadow, each blade of grass a story Meg's broth. The tanner's grit, Jack's laughter woven into a tapestry of defiance. Their world was filthy, but their hearts were fierce, and you carry that fire now, soft and steady, a glow that warms without stinging. Feel your breath ease, your hands loosen, as the town's grime melts into a whisper of resilience, a promise that endurance outshines disgust. You're safe here, wrapped in the hum of their survival, where love and grit cleanse what filth never could. Let the stars hold you, their light a vow that your own battles, like theirs, will yield to dawn. Close your eyes, drift, and let the night cradle you, gentle as a town reborn, until morning calls. Sweet dreams.